Hello there, and welcome to Core of Earth, where curiosity feels at home and questions are never in a rush. Tonight, we're setting out on a journey that might sound a little unusual, even a little unsettling at first, but in the spirit of wonder and calm exploration, we'll walk through it slowly. I'd like you to imagine just for a moment that humanity itself might not be the simple product of nature we usually believe it to be, that our existence, our development, our struggles and breakthroughs could be part of something larger. Not an accident, not just a blind roll of evolutionary dice, but something designed, guided, or even tested by forces we can barely begin to name. Some call it higher intelligence. Some imagine advanced extraterrestrials. Others speculate about future humans looping back in time. The common thread is the possibility that humanity is in one way or another an experiment. Before we dive into that possibility, I'd like to turn the question gently toward you. Where are you listening from tonight? What's the hour in your part of the world? And how does it feel to be here in this moment with this voice in your ears? I ask not just because it makes the subject personal, but because this question of time and place is at the very heart of what it means to be human. If we were an experiment scattered across the globe, linked by stories and thoughts, maybe every one of us is like a different data point in some vast project. It's an odd idea, but it also makes you pause. Out of all the billions of moments happening on Earth right now, this is the one you're in. If you find this kind of exploration soothing, or if curiosity helps you unwind after a long day, I'd be grateful if you supported this little space. A simple a quiet subscription, maybe even a share with someone who could use a calm conversation about big ideas. It helps this corner of the internet reach others who might also enjoy slowing down with something thoughtful. So let's take a slow breath, let distractions soften at the edges, and begin to walk into this idea together. We'll consider the leaps in our history that don't quite add up. The ancient myths that sound suspiciously like origin stories written in code, the mysteries tucked into our very DNA, and the possibility that our lives are unfolding under the eyes of watchers. Whether they're gods of legend, scientists from another world, or even our own distant descendants. It's a big subject, I know. Some parts sound like science fiction, others like religion, others like late-night speculation over a tea. But the goal here isn't to prove or disprove anything. It's to step into the question carefully, to hold it in our hands, and to see what it feels like to look at humanity through that lens. Even if it's just for the span of a quiet evening, it can be strangely freeing to imagine that our place in the universe might not be entirely random. Think of the way humans have always asked, why are we here? That question appears everywhere, in every culture, in every age. It's painted on cave walls, carved into temple stones, written in sacred texts, and whispered in bedtime stories. If there's even a chance that the answer could involve us being part of something intentional, a designed experiment of sorts, then it gives a new layer of meaning to all of those old questions. It doesn't settle them, but it adds a dimension worth exploring. The idea that humanity might be an experiment isn't new. Versions of it stretch back thousands of years. In ancient myths, gods shape people out of clay, or breathe life into dust, or descend from the sky to teach laws and skills. These stories may be metaphors, but they also sound a lot like origin accounts of beings deliberately crafting and guiding us. Later, in more modern times, the conversation shifted to science fiction tales of alien scientists seeding Earth or simulations run by civilizations beyond our own. And now, in the age of genetics and artificial intelligence, we find ourselves revisiting the same idea with a new vocabulary. We wonder if the strange gaps in our evolutionary story, the sudden bursts of creativity and intelligence, might be signs of interference or design. For some, this is a comforting thought. If we are part of an experiment, maybe there's a purpose to our struggles. Maybe there's a hand guiding us towards something. For others, it's an unsettling possibility, raising questions about free will, ethics, and what it means to live a life that might be under observation. And still, for others, it's just an interesting mental exercise, a way to frame the oddities of human history in a new light. What makes this idea especially compelling is how many different disciplines it touches. Biology, archaeology, mythology, physics, even philosophy all have something to say about whether humanity's story looks entirely natural or not. When you put the puzzle pieces together, you start to notice patterns that don't always fit neatly into the narrative of random chance. You see sudden leaps, mysteries without easy answers, and traditions that seem to hint at knowledge beyond their time. None of it is proof, of course, but together it creates a canvas that invites us to imagine. If humanity were an experiment, what kind of experiment would it be? Would it be about intelligence, to see how far a species could climb from fire to philosophy? Would it be about morality, to test how beings handle the tension between cooperation and conflict? Would it be about survival, to watch how a fragile species adapts to countless challenges? Or would it be something stranger, still a puzzle whose purpose we can't yet guess at? Because the experimenters think on scales we can't imagine. Sometimes people frame this in religious terms, with God as the designer and Earth as a kind of testing ground. Other times it's as wrapped in scientific speculation about extraterrestrials who might seed life across galaxies, like gardeners planting seeds. And in more speculative corners, people even consider the idea that future humans with technologies we can't yet dream of might be running experiments on their own past to understand how they came to be. Each of these possibilities is different, but they all circle back to the same central question. Are we here by accident or by design? There's also the matter of observation. If we are an experiment, are we being watched? Are there moments when the observers step in, adjusting the course of events, or is it all hands off, a pure test to see what happens when a species is left to its own devices? When we look at the long arc of human history, the rises and falls of civilizations, the breakthroughs and collapses, it's hard not to wonder if some of those turning points carried a hidden hand. That's not to say everything's planned, but it raises the possibility that some of what we call coincidence might not be so accidental. At the same time, we have to acknowledge the dangers of this idea. Thinking of ourselves as part of an experiment can lead to all kinds of interpretations, some inspiring and some troubling. It can make us feel special, chosen, watched over, or it can make us feel small, powerless, and subject to forces we don't control. The truth, if there is one, may not be either extreme. It might be something in between, a mixture of randomness and intention, chaos and design. Still, sitting with the question is worthwhile, because even if the answer is that humanity is entirely natural, the very act of considering the experiment idea sharpens our sense of who we are and how we fit into the universe. It reminds us that our story is still being written, whether by ourselves, by unseen experimenters, or by the unfolding laws of nature. And so, with curiosity as our guide, let's begin this long walk through possibilities. We'll move through the leaps and mysteries of our past, the myths that carry echoes of creation, the science that leaves gaps too wide to ignore, and the speculations that ask us to think bigger than we're used to. The path may twist, but step by step, we'll stay with it, letting the pieces of the puzzle come together at their own pace. If sudden leaps in our story raise questions, then the myths humanity has carried for thousands of years raise even more. Long before the language of evolution or genetics existed, people were already asking how we came to be. They looked up at the stars. They traced patterns in the seasons. They told stories around fires. And what they came up with often sounded less like random chance and more like design. God's molding humans from clay. Sky begins descending to teach laws and crafts. Creators speaking the world into existence. These myths, found in cultures scattered across the globe, may be symbolic and layered with meaning, but they often carry the same undertone. Humanity was made. Take Mesopotamia, one of the cradles of civilization. In the Babylonian creation epic, The Anuma Elish, the gods decide to create humankind to bear the burden of labor, freeing the divine from toil. Humans in this story are crafted from the blood of a slain god, mixed with clay and shaped into beings meant to serve. That may sound grim, but it paints a picture not unlike an experiment. A group of powerful entities decides they want workers. They design a species for a purpose, and they set it into motion. Whether meant literally or metaphorically, the story suggests intent, a guiding hand behind our existence. Move westward to ancient Egypt, and the myths shift in detail, but echo in theme. In some traditions, the god Cain is said to have fashioned humans on a potter's wheel, carefully shaping each person out of clay and then breathing life into them. The imagery is intimate and deliberate. Humans as crafted objects formed with care, not accidents of chance. Even the potter's wheel itself feels like the ancient imagination's version of a laboratory tool. The gods here aren't just distant forces. They're artisans, designers, and experimenters at work. In Greek mythology, the figure of Prometheus plays a central role in the shaping of humanity. Though the stories vary, Prometheus is often credited with creating humans from clay and then defying the gods by stealing fire to give to them. Again, we see the theme of design, of deliberate crafting, followed by intervention in the form of fire, an upgrade that changed humanity's trajectory forever. If we think of fire not just as literal flame, but as symbolic of knowledge and technology, the story becomes even more striking. A creator figure acting against the will of higher powers gifts humanity with a leap forward. That sounds less like natural progression and more like a dramatic adjustment to the experiment. Across the ocean in the traditions of the mare, there are creation stories preserved in the Pulvu, a sacred text of the Kichi people. In these accounts, the gods attempt to create humanity multiple times. The first beings made from mud fall apart. The second is made of wood, lacks souls and understanding, and is destroyed. Finally, humans are formed from maize, the staple crop of the region, and this version succeeds. The repeated trials, the adjustments, the failures, and corrections. These details read almost exactly like experiments. Attempts are made, results are observed, modifications follow until the desired outcome is achieved. It's a pattern scientists today would recognize. In Hindu tradition, the Rigveda describes the cosmic being Purusha, whose body is sacrificed by the gods to form the universe and humanity. Later texts describe Brahma creating humans, and countless myths outline cycles of creation and destruction where beings are brought into existence, tested, and sometimes swept away to begin anew. Again, there's the sense of deliberation, of cycles of trial and error, of humanity as part of a larger design. Even in Norse mythology, we find echoes of creation by design. The first humans, Ask and Embel, are said to have been shaped from driftwood by the gods Odin, Vili, and Vi. The gods don't simply find humans, they fashion them, giving them breath, awareness, and senses. This suggests a deliberate upgrade, a conscious act of giving certain abilities, not a slow evolutionary unfolding. The Abrahamic traditions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam also share this theme. In Genesis, God forms Adam from the dust of the ground and breathes life into him. Later, Eve is created from Adam's rib. These are not gradual processes, but sudden acts of design. Humanity in this framework is intentionally made, placed in a garden, and given rules. It is hard not to see the resonance with the language of experiments, a controlled environment, a set of conditions, observation, and consequences when rules are broken. Now, skeptics will say these are myths, products of imagination, symbolic tales meant to explain mysteries before science could. And that is certainly true, in part. Myths serve many purposes. They pass on values, explain natural phenomena, and create a shared identity. But what makes them interesting in this context is how consistently they frame human origins in terms of making, shaping, testing, and guiding. Across continents and centuries, cultures came up with stories that sound strikingly similar to the structure of experiments. One way to interpret this is psychological. Humans are natural storytellers, and when faced with the mystery of existence, we imagine creators. But another way, if we're willing to entertain it, is that myths preserve fragments of memory or encounter. Perhaps in deep prehistory, something happened that seeded the idea of humanity being made. Perhaps contact with beings beyond our understanding left impressions distorted through retelling until they became myths of gods and creators. Take, for example, the Sumerian myths of the Anunnaki. These deities are described as coming from the heavens, bringing knowledge and shaping humanity. Some modern theorists have interpreted these tales as evidence of extraterrestrial intervention, pointing to details that seem oddly technical for ancient stories. While mainstream scholarship sees them as mythological, the parallels to the experiment idea are hard to ignore. Beings arrive, decide to create or modify humans, and set them to work. Similarly, in many indigenous traditions around the world, there are stories of sky people, star beings, or visitors who came from above to interact with early humans. The Hopi speak of the Kakis, powerful beings associated with the stars who taught and guided. The Dune of West Africa have intricate astronomical knowledge tied to myths of beings from Sirius. These stories may be symbolic, but when viewed through the experiment lens, they read like accounts of observers or experimenters interacting with their subjects. Even myths of destruction and renewal can be seen this way. Flood stories are nearly universal. Tales of the gods wiping out humanity with water and beginning again. The Bible's flood, the Mesopotamian flood of Utnapishtim, the Hindu story of Manu, the Aztec cycles of suns, all describe catastrophic resets. To some, these are allegories for natural disasters. But in the experiment framework, they could be seen as interventions, tests that failed, or data points that required a restart. Another recurring theme is the gift of knowledge. Myths often describe humans receiving critical abilities from divine or semi-divine figures. Fire, writing, agriculture, medicine. These gifts are rarely gradual discoveries in the stories. They're bestowed suddenly, almost as if inserted into the experiment at key moments. The gods decide it's time, and humanity receives a tool that changes everything. Even trickster figures like Loki in Normyth or Coyote in Native American traditions play roles that resemble disruptive variables in an experiment. They introduce chaos, test boundaries, and force adaptation. From the perspective of myth as memory, these figures could represent real interventions, moments when the experimenters introduced unpredictable elements to see how humanity would respond. The consistency of these themes is striking. Creation from clay or dust, life breathed in, gift of knowledge, trials and resets. Watches from above across cultures that had no contact with each other. These motifs repeat. Some say that's because the human mind works in universal patterns. Others suggest it's because the underlying truth might be universal too. What makes this especially compelling? What if humanity was an experiment? Documentary for sleep as how myths often carry layers. On the surface, they are stories. Beneath, they're allegories for natural events or psychological truths, but sometimes they may also be echoes of history, distorted memories of encounters or events that left too deep a mark to vanish entirely. If humanity were an experiment, myths could be the way our ancestors recorded their brushes with the experimenters, filtered through the language and symbols they had available. Modern readers often separate myth from science, treating one as imagination and the other as fact. But in the context of this question, they overlap. Myths may preserve insight science is only now beginning to frame differently. Stories of beings shaping us from clay-parallel genetic manipulation. Tales of gifts from the gods align with sudden leaps in technology. Accounts of watchers and punishments mirror the idea of observation and control. It doesn't mean myths are literally true, but it does suggest They may not be entirely invented either. Perhaps they're fragments of a larger narrative we've only begun to piece together. And whether or not they point to actual experimenters, they certainly reveal how deeply humans have always suspected that we are more than accidents. So when we look at the myths of the makers, we're not just looking at stories. We're looking at humanity's earliest attempts to answer the question of design, of guidance, of purpose. And we're looking at the uncanny way those attempts echo across cultures. The builders of myths may not have had the language of laboratories and experiments, but they spoke in clay and fire, in gods and gifts, in cycles of creation and destruction. The pattern they drew remains visible even now. And with those stories in mind, it's natural to turn from the world of myth to the world within us, to the code written in our very bodies. 'Cause if we are an experiment, then the strongest evidence might not be in stories told around fires, but in the double helix of DNA that carries every instruction for who and what we are. When myths speak of creation, they often talk about clay, dust, breath, or divine sparks. Today, we don't use those words. We use the language of biology. Instead of clay, we talk about cells. Instead of breath, we talk about genetic coding. And instead of sparks from gods, we talk about DNA. But even in this scientific language, the question of design doesn't go away. In fact, it becomes sharper. If there is any place where evidence of an experiment might linger, it's in the code written inside every one of us. DNA is often described as the blueprint of life, though it might be better called a library. Every cell in our body carries this vast archive of instructions. 4 chemical letters arranged in patterns that dictate how proteins are built, how cells function, how bodies grow. It is a system of staggering complexity, so finely tuned that even the smallest error can mean the difference between health and disease. The deeper scientists study it, the more intricate it becomes, and the more it seems to raise the question, could something so elaborate really be the product of random chance alone? One of the enduring puzzles in genetics is the presence of what was once called junk DNA. For decades, scientists noticed that large portions of our genome didn't seem to code for anything. These sections weren't instructions for proteins. They didn't appear to serve obvious functions. And yet they made up the majority of our DNA. The term junk was used dismissively, as if these were leftovers of evolution, scraps in the code. But as research advanced, it became clear that these sections aren't useless at all. Many of them play roles in regulation, timing, and structure, acting like switches that turn other genes on and off, or scaffolds that shape the way the genome folds and functions. Far from junk, they are hidden layers of instruction. To some, this discovery strengthens the experiment hypothesis. Imagine an engineer designing a program. The code isn't just about direct instructions. It includes backup systems, regulators, and hidden functions. The fact that our DNA has this kind of complexity suggests not just survival, but fine-tuned organization, almost as if the experimenters left not only the visible blueprint, but also a system of levers and switches to test different outcomes. Another curiosity lies in the similarities and differences between human DNA and that of other species. We share about 98 to 99% of our DNA with chimpanzees, our closest relatives. That tiny percentage of difference is responsible for the vast gulf between human civilization and chimpanzee communities. How is it that such a small genetic shift produced language, art, science, and technology? Some biologists explain this as the cumulative effect of regulatory genes, tiny switches that control how and when proteins are produced. But others find it remarkable that such a narrow gap led to such a massive divergence. In the experiment framework, one might say it looks like someone adjusted a few parameters and watched as an entirely new outcome emerged. Then there's the case of human chromosome 2. Humans have 23 pairs of chromosomes, while most other great apes have 24. When scientists examined this difference, they found evidence that 2 ancestral chromosomes fused together at some point in our lineage. The fusion site is clear, containing vestiges of telomeres and centromere in unusual positions. To mainstream science, this is a natural event, a quirk of evolutionary history. But some theorists point out how unusual it is that such a fusion not only happened, but also worked so perfectly, producing a stable chromosome that became fixed in the entire human population. If it were an experiment, this would look like a deliberate edit, a test of a new configuration that was locked in as the new standard. Human DNA also contains sequences called endogenous retroviruses, remnants of ancient viral infections that became embedded in our genome and passed down through generations. Some of these viral fragments have been repurposed by our biology, playing roles in processes like pregnancy. It's as if the code of invaders was absorbed, rewritten, and put to use. From one perspective, this is just a creative quirk of evolution. From another, it resembles the work of programmers experimenting with imported code, blending outside material into the system to see what new functions might emerge. Perhaps most intriguing is the human brain. Genetic studies show that a handful of genes underwent rapid evolution in our lineage, especially those related to brain size and complexity. The gene FXP2, for example, is linked to language ability. In humans, it carries small but significant differences compared to other primates, differences that seem to have helped unlock speech. Another gene, H1, underwent unusually fast changes and appears to be involved in brain development. These sudden accelerations raise eyebrows. Why did certain genes shift so quickly? Why in just the right ways to produce capacities that set us apart so radically? If we framed humanity as an experiment, these genes could be seen as the deliberate tweaks, the upgraded lines of code inserted to move the project forward. Then there is the question of mutation itself. Mutations are usually random, but sometimes they appear almost suspiciously well-timed. For example, the development of lactose tolerance in some human populations coincided with the domestication of cattle. This adaptation allowed those groups to make use of milk as a food source, greatly expanding their options. It's possible this was coincidence, but it feels remarkably convenient, as if the system were adjusting itself in response to new conditions. In the experiment lens, it could be interpreted as a targeted adaptation, a tweak added when needed. Another genetic puzzle is the relative lack of diversity in humanity compared to what might be expected. Evidence suggests that at some point in our past, the human population went through a bottleneck, shrinking to a very small number before expanding again. This left us with less genetic variation than many other species. Why would a population so small survive and then thrive while others disappeared? Some see it as luck. Others wonder if it was selection, a pruning of the experiment to keep only the versions with desired traits. Even the way our DNA repairs itself is fascinating. Cells constantly face damage from radiation, toxins, and replication errors. Yet DNA has built-in repair mechanisms that fix many of these problems. It's like a system with self-correcting code, a feature any good engineer would recognize as essential. It doesn't prove design, but it certainly mirrors the way humans design systems to withstand errors and keep running. Then there's the broader question: why DNA at all? Life could, in theory, have used other molecules as information carriers, but DNA is uniquely suited for stability, replication, and adaptability. Some scientists even call it the perfect molecule. Was that luck, inevitability, or a chosen platform? If life across the universe is seeded with DNA, or something very much like it, as some theories propose, then it raises the possibility that a common template is being used like a standard operating system for biological experiments across worlds. When people imagine experiments on humanity, they often think of dramatic interventions, aliens tinkering with genes, gods shaping clay into people. But the truth may be subtler. The experiment could be embedded in the very structure of DNA, in the way mutations arise, in the timing of genetic shifts, in the patterns that allow for sudden leaps. The system may be designed not for constant interference, but for self-directed adaptation with hidden rules guiding the flow. And perhaps the most haunting question is this: if DNA carries the blueprint of life, could it also carry hidden messages? Some have speculated that patterns in non-coding DNA might function like embedded signatures left by whoever or whatever set the system in motion. Mainstream science doesn't support this idea, but it has an odd allure. If you wanted to leave proof of design, where better to place it than in the code of every living cell? A signature written not on stone or parchment, but in the very language of biology. Of course, skeptics remind us that complexity doesn't necessarily mean design. Evolution is powerful, and given enough time, it can produce astonishing systems. What looks like code may just be the product of countless iterations filtered by survival. But even if that's true, it doesn't erase the strangeness of how DNA operates, how a molecule can encode not just bodies, but minds. Not just survival, but art and imagination. Whether accidental or deliberate, it feels almost miraculous. Looking at DNA this way blurs the line between science and myth. Where ancient stories spoke of divine breath in clay, genetics speaks of nucleotides and proteins. But both frameworks suggest that something more than chance might be at play. Myths framed it as gods crafting humans in their image. Science frames it as genetic shifts that somehow gave us awareness and creativity far beyond our relatives. Either way, the sense of being shaped remains, and it leaves us with a curious thought. If our DNA is indeed a kind of blueprint, then perhaps we're not finished yet. Blueprints often include phases, instructions for what comes next. What if humanity is still in the middle of the design process, with future leaps encoded in the genome, waiting for the right conditions to unfold? That possibility that our evolution may not be done, that we may yet reveal new abilities, adds another layer to the experiment question. So when we think about blueprints in our DNA, we are not just looking at molecules. We are looking at the possibility that within us in every cell lies both the evidence of our past and the seeds of our future. Whether written by nature, by accident, or by unseen hands, the code is there guiding us, shaping us, and leaving us to wonder what it truly means. And with that thought, the story of the experiment naturally turns upward beyond the code in our cells to the beings described, across time as the ones watching over us. Legends of angels, sky people, and distant observers. If DNA carries the blueprint, perhaps the watchers carry the role of keeping the experiment in motion. If the code of life holds the blueprint, then the idea of watchers suggests the experiment is not left to run unattended. Across cultures and across ages, humans have told stories of beings above us, sometimes literally in the sky, sometimes in realms just out of sight, who observe, guide, and occasionally intervene. Whether they are described as gods, angels, spirits, or visitors from distant stars, the common thread is that we are not entirely alone in our development. Someone or something has always been watching. In religious traditions, this theme is central. The God of the Abrahamic faiths is not only creator but overseer, watching humanity, judging actions, rewarding, and punishing. Angels appear in these traditions as messengers sent down with specific instructions or revelations, sometimes to entire peoples, sometimes to individuals. These are not distant deities who set the world in motion and walked away. They're active observers present in the narrative, ensuring that the experiment, if we frame it that way, stays within certain bounds. Take the story of the Watchers from the Book of Enoch, an ancient Jewish text that did not make it into the standard biblical canon, but still echoes through later traditions. In it, a group of angels descends to earth and begins interacting directly with humans. They teach skills, share knowledge, and even cross boundaries by taking human partners. For their actions, they are punished, but the story leaves a lasting impression. Beings from above came down, observed, and influenced human life. The very name Watchers suggests their role. They were not just divine messengers. They were custodians, monitors, keepers of the experiment. Other cultures tell similar tales. In Mesopotamia, the Anunnaki were said to be deities who descended from the heavens, bringing laws and order to human society. In Greek myths, the gods on Mount Olympus watched humanity constantly, sometimes intervening in wars, sometimes rewarding devotion, sometimes punishing hubris. They were not indifferent. They were curious, invested, even entertained by the struggles of mortals. In this framework, Olympus was not just a mountain, but a vantage point, a place from which the Watchers could keep an eye on their creation. In indigenous traditions across the Americas, Africa, and Oceania, stories abound of sky beings who came down, taught agriculture, healing, or cosmology, and then withdrew. These beings rarely stay permanently. They appear, provide knowledge, and then vanish, leaving humans to wrestle with what they've been given. It sounds remarkably like periodic check-ins, moments when the observers decide to make adjustments or provide guidance before stepping back. When we move from mythology to more modern accounts, the theme doesn't fade. UFO sightings, alien abduction stories, and close encounters all tend to include one detail: the sense of being observed. People describe bright lights hovering silently, figures standing at the foot of their beds, beings who watch without speaking. Sometimes they intervene, conducting what witnesses interpret as experiments. Sometimes they simply watch and vanish. Skeptics dismiss these as dreams, hallucinations, or cultural projections. But regardless of explanation, the imagery is consistent with a role that humanity has always imagined for higher beings, the Watchers on high. Even in science, the idea surfaces in unexpected ways, the Fermi paradox. The question of why we have not yet detected extraterrestrial civilizations has inspired hypotheses such as the zoo theory. According to this idea, advanced civilizations may know we are here, but deliberately avoid contact, treating us like animals in a preserve. They watch from afar, but they do not interfere openly, waiting for us to reach a certain stage of development. It's an unsettling thought, but it aligns neatly with the experiment framework. If we're being studied, then perhaps the absence of open contact is deliberate. The observers do not want to disrupt the results. The Watchers need not be extraterrestrials. Of course, in another speculative corner, the idea arises that future humans could be watching us. If time travel is ever possible, if simulations of past epochs can be run with extraordinary fidelity, then our lives could be monitored by our descendants. From their perspective, watching us might be as ordinary as scientists today studying bacteria in a petri dish. They would observe not just our actions, but our choices, seeing how their ancestors lived and why they made the decisions they did. In that frame, the Watchers are not aliens or angels, but ourselves returning from what is to come. What strikes many about the Watcher theme is how it mirrors human behavior. We ourselves conduct countless experiments on animals, plants, and even on our own technology. We observe from a distance, sometimes intervening, sometimes letting events unfold. We track progress, we introduce variables, we record outcomes. It makes sense that if there are higher intelligences above us, they might do the same. And perhaps the reason stories of Watchers are so universal is that humans deep down know what it feels like to be in that role. We project it onto the heavens because we understand it intimately on Earth. The feeling of being watched also carries a psychological dimension. Studies have shown that humans often behave differently when they believe they are being observed. Productivity changes, honesty increases, social cohesion tightens. Even subtle cues like an image of eyes posted on a wall can influence behavior. If humanity as a whole believed we were being watched, whether by gods, aliens, or future scientists, it would shape our actions. In that sense, the Watcher motif might be part of the experiment itself, a way to influence outcomes by instilling the belief of oversight. In literature and culture, the Watcher theme continues to resonate. From Orwell's Big Brother to modern science fiction about galactic overseers, the idea of unseen observation haunts us. Sometimes it comforts, suggesting guidance and protection. Sometimes it disturbs, implying surveillance and control. But either way, it reflects a deep-seated intuition that we are not moving through history unseen. Someone somewhere has their gaze upon us. Another layer comes from mystical traditions. Many esoteric systems describe beings who watch and guide human spiritual development. In Gnostic thought, archons are entities that oversee aspects of the material world. In Kabbalistic teachings, angels serve as intermediaries, carrying observations and prayers between humans and the divine. In shamanic practices, spirits of ancestors or animals are invoked as watchers and guides. Across these traditions, the role of unseen observers is not a fringe idea. It is central. Skeptics would argue that the watcher motif is simply projection. Humans fear being alone, so we imagine eyes above us. We crave accountability, so we invent gods who watch. But if we look at the consistency of these stories, the details that repeat across cultures, the argument for projection feels incomplete. Why would cultures separated by oceans and centuries arrive at such similar motifs? Why watchers? Why beings above? Why periodic interventions? The patterns suggest at least the possibility that these are not just psychological inventions, but echoes of something real. And there is one more detail to consider. Watchers are rarely described as omnipotent. They are powerful, yes, but not unlimited. They make mistakes, they disagree. They sometimes fall or rebel. This is true in the story of the Watchers in Enoch, in the myths of Olympian gods, in the tales of trickster spirits. It is as if the Watchers themselves are participants in something larger, bound by rules, subject to higher oversight. If we are an experiment, perhaps the Watchers are not the experimenters themselves, but the field researchers, the ones tasked with observing and reporting. That would explain why they sometimes seem fallible, even flawed. All of this leads to a difficult but fascinating question. If we are watched, to what extent are we also guided? Do the Watchers intervene only rarely? Or are there fingerprints all over our history? When empires fall, when prophets rise, when sudden inventions change everything, are these natural processes or subtle nudges from above? We cannot know for certain, but the stories we tell suggest that humanity has always suspected there is more in play than meets the eye. So whether they are angels, aliens, future humans, or something stranger still, the Watchers on high remain a constant presence in our imagination. They may comfort us, they may unsettle us, but they always remind us of the same possibility, that our lives are not unfolding in isolation, that somewhere beyond the veil, eyes are upon us, curious, patient, perhaps even waiting for the results of a test we don't fully know we're taking. And if that is the case, then one of the most puzzling aspects of their observation must be our consciousness itself. Because among all the traits they might see, nothing stands out more than the fact that humans not only live, but also know that they live. The leap into self-awareness, into thought and reflection, is not just another adaptation. It is the very thing that makes us wonder about Watchers in the first place. And so it is natural that the story of the experiment turns next to the mystery of consciousness and why it feels less like an accident and more like an upgrade. If there is one feature of humanity that raises the biggest questions for the experiment idea, it is consciousness. The awareness that we exist, the ability to reflect on our own thoughts, the sense of self that lives behind our eyes. All of this separates us from every other creature we know. Other animals think, remember, and even plan. But as far as we can tell, only humans ask why they exist in the first place. Only humans tell stories about being created, wonder if they are watched, or sit quietly and reflect on the meaning of their lives. Consciousness is more than just information processing. It is the feeling of being alive, and it may be the greatest puzzle in science and philosophy alike. From a biological point of view, consciousness is supposed to be the product of brains. Billions of neurons, each firing tiny electrical signals, somehow give rise to thoughts, memories, and the experience of being. But the leap from matter to mind is one that science has not yet bridged. We can map brain regions, measure activity with scans, even alter perception with chemicals or stimulation. But the question remains, how does activity and tissue produce the vivid reality of awareness? This is what philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness. And if humanity is an experiment, then perhaps this problem is the central question. Was consciousness the goal all along? Consider how evolution works. It favors survival and reproduction. Yet consciousness often seems like more than what survival demands. To hunt, gather, and raise children, a creature needs perception, memory, and instincts. But why does it need to contemplate morality, art, or the vastness of the universe? Why does it need to dream of futures that have not happened, or write poetry, or invent mathematics? These capacities go far beyond the basics of survival. They suggest that something extra was added, something that doesn't make sense if we were shaped only by blind chance. One way to see this is to compare humans with other intelligent animals. Dolphins communicate. Elephants grieve. Crows use tools. These behaviors show impressive intelligence. But none of these species, as far as we can tell, writes creation myths or debates the nature of time. They live fully, but they do not appear to question existence itself. Humans do endlessly. We ask why we are here, where we came from, and whether someone else is watching. That obsession with meaning is one of the clearest signs that consciousness is not just a tool for survival, but a realm of its own. Some scientists argue that consciousness is simply an emergent property, that when brains reach a certain complexity, awareness naturally arises. It is compared to how a whirlpool appears in water, or how heat emerges from molecules in motion. The parts themselves do not hold the property, but together they create it. Yet, even if this is true, the timing of humanity's leap into self-awareness is remarkable. It happened quickly. Geologically speaking, for millions of years, hominins lived without art or philosophy. Then, suddenly, symbolic thinking exploded. Cave walls filled with paintings, rituals marked burials, language blossomed, and humans began living as though life had meaning. If this leap was natural, it was also extraordinarily fast. And if it was guided, it looks like the precise moment when the experimenters flipped the switch. There are also those who wonder whether consciousness might not just be an emergent property of brains, but something more fundamental. Some philosophers and physicists suggest that consciousness could be woven into the fabric of reality itself, like space and time. In this view, brains don't produce consciousness. They tune into it like radios receiving signals. If that is true, then the human brain might have been shaped as a receiver, adjusted to access deeper levels of awareness. In the experiment framework, this would suggest that humanity's role is not just to survive, but to explore consciousness itself, to act as a window through which the universe experiences itself. Experiences of altered states add to the puzzle. Through meditation, dreams, or certain substances, humans often report feeling that consciousness expands, transcends, or even separates from the body. People describe a sense of unity, timelessness, or contact with higher beings. Science often explains these as brain chemistry, but their universality across cultures raises questions. Why do humans uniquely have the capacity to reach such states? Why do they so often involve encounters with watchers, guides, or experimenters? Perhaps these altered states are part of the design, ways to glimpse behind the curtain, to sense that there is more than the material. Another aspect of consciousness is morality. Humans not only think, but also judge. We create systems of right and wrong, justice and injustice, fairness and punishment. Morality may have evolutionary benefits, encouraging cooperation, But the depth of human ethical reasoning goes beyond practical needs. We argue about justice, even when it costs us personally. We sacrifice for principles. We create laws not just to control, but to express values. Why should a survival-driven brain care about abstract justice? If we are part of an experiment, perhaps morality is one of the core tests given consciousness. Will we use it to create kindness and fairness, or to exploit and dominate? The problem of suffering ties into this. Humans are aware not only of their own pain, but of the pain of others. We imagine what others feel. We empathize. We even grieve for strangers we've never met. This deep empathy shapes our art, our stories, our religions. It also burdens us. An animal feels its own pain, but humans carry the weight of knowing that suffering fills the world. Why give a species this capacity unless it is part of the experiment? Unless the goal is to see how we respond to such awareness, whether we numb ourselves, despair, or work to ease the pain of others. Another mystery is creativity. Consciousness doesn't just perceive, it was invented. It imagines things that do not exist and brings them into reality. Music, mathematics, literature, architecture, all of these are products of imagination grounded in consciousness. Creativity is not simply problem-solving for survival. It produces symphonies, cathedrals, and novels that serve no direct evolutionary purpose, but enrich human life immeasurably. In the experiment frame, creativity might be the ultimate variable. Given awareness, what will the species create? Will it use imagination to explore beauty or to invent weapons? Will it build bridges or walls? Dreaming is another phenomenon that deepens the puzzle. Every night, humans slip into vivid inner worlds where logic bends, time shifts, and symbolism reigns. Dreams can inspire art, science, even inventions. They can terrify, comfort, or confuse. No one knows exactly why we dream, though theories range from memory processing to emotional regulation. But the sheer richness of dream life feels almost like a second existence, a hidden layer of the experiment. If consciousness is the main test, dreams may be its playground, a nightly reminder that awareness is more fluid than we think. Science fiction often imagines experiments where artificial intelligence develops consciousness. In these stories, machines begin to wonder about their existence, to feel, to desire. Humanity in this analogy might be in the same position. A species that was once unaware, but suddenly woke up. The difference is that, in our case, we don't know who the programmers might be. The moment of awakening is already behind us, and we are left trying to figure out why it happened. Consciousness also raises questions about free will. Are our choices truly our own, or are they the result of brain processes we cannot control? Neuroscience experiments show that decisions can sometimes be predicted by brain activity before we become aware of them. If that is the case, then our sense of choice might be an illusion. In the experiment framework, this adds another layer. Perhaps the watchers are not only observing what we do, but also how we experience the illusion of choosing. Or perhaps true free will was the gift, the ultimate variable added to the test. The scale of consciousness also matters. Individual awareness is remarkable enough, but human consciousness does not stay confined. It connects. Through language and culture, thoughts move from mind to mind, creating shared realities. Entire civilizations are built on collective stories, from religions to nations to scientific paradigms. Consciousness is contagious. It spreads, links, multiplies. An experiment on individuals becomes an experiment on collectives, testing not only how single minds behave, but how they interlock to form societies. And perhaps the most unsettling thought is this: consciousness may be the only reason we can even imagine we're in an experiment. Rocks, trees, and even most animals live without such speculation. But humans not only exist, we reflect on existence itself. We wonder if we're observed, if we're guided, if we have purpose. That recursive loop, awareness of awareness, is both our gift and our burden. It sets us apart, and it may be the very reason any higher intelligence would find us worth studying. The puzzle of consciousness is far from solved, and perhaps it never will be. But whether seen as an accident of evolution, an emergent property of complexity, or a deliberate feature of a grand experiment, it is the thing that defines us most. Without it, there would be no myths, no science, no questions, no experiments at all. With it, everything changes. And when we follow the path of consciousness into history, we begin to see how it shapes civilizations that rose far faster and higher than expected. Civilizations that seem to appear almost too soon, carrying knowledge and architecture that shouldn't have been possible for their time. And so the story of the experiment flows naturally from the mystery of awareness into the mystery of civilizations that may have been guided, accelerated, or even seeded by hands unseen. When we look at the record of human history, the common assumption is that progress was slow, steady, and built brick by brick across millennia. But every so often, when we peer into the archaeological record, we find moments that defy that simple picture. Civilizations that seem to have sprung up almost fully formed with knowledge, architecture, and organization far beyond what we would expect for their time. These sudden appearances raise a question. Were these societies truly self-made? Or were they nudged forward, perhaps even planted, as if someone accelerated the experiment? Take Mesopotamia, often called the cradle of civilization. Around 5,000 years ago, cities like Uruk and Ur appeared with monumental architecture, writing systems, and complex governance. The sudden rise of uniform writing used to track trade and law feels like a leap more than a crawl. It's one thing to grow crops and settle villages. It's another to create entire systems of symbolic marks that can preserve thought across generations. For archaeologists, the speed of this shift remains striking. Some see it as the inevitable result of population density and agriculture. Others wonder if something more was at work. In the framework of an experiment, it looks like a sudden upgrade. Language not just spoken, but written. A tool that would forever alter the trajectory of humanity. Egypt follows a similar pattern. Around the same time Mesopotamia was flourishing, the Nile Valley saw the rise of a civilization with stunning achievements. Within a relatively short span, they were building pyramids, aligning monuments with the stars, and developing a writing system of their own. The scale of the Great Pyramid even today is staggering. Millions of blocks of stone, some weighing tons, precisely cut and placed with alignments that modern engineers still debate. For mainstream archaeology, this is explained as the culmination of gradual advances in engineering and labor organization. But to many, it feels almost too soon, too advanced, as if the knowledge required was seeded rather than discovered. Stories from the Egyptians themselves often credit gods or divine beings with providing wisdom. In the experiment framework, Egypt could be seen as a test of what happens when a civilization receives advanced knowledge of architecture and astronomy in a compressed timeline. Farther east, the Indus Valley civilization appeared around the same era, boasting urban planning that rivals modern standards. Cities like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa had grid layouts, advanced drainage systems, and standardized weights and measures. These are hallmarks of a highly organized society. Yet the Indus script, which remains undeciphered, appeared without clear precursors. The sophistication of this society raises the same question. How did such organization, planning, and technical skill develop so rapidly? It looks less like a slow climb and more like a sudden bloom. In China, early dynasties developed bronze casting, written records, and massive projects like city walls with surprising speed. The Shang dynasty emerged in the second millennium. BCE displayed advanced metallurgy and a complex system of divination using oracle bones. The speed at which these practices emerged with little in the way of gradual let-up suggests another case of a civilization that seemed to appear with tools already in hand. And then there is the mysterious case of the Mech civilization in Mesoamerica. Long before the Maya or Aztecs, the Mech were carving colossal stone heads, developing sophisticated art, and possibly influencing later Mesoamerican writing systems. Where did their knowledge and artistry come from? Some suggest diffusion from other continents, but evidence remains thin. Others wonder if the Mech were another sudden experiment, a society planted with seeds of knowledge to see how it would grow in isolation. The question grows sharper when we look at specific anomalies. Take the Pyre map, a 16th century Ottoman document said to contain fragments of much older charts. Parts of it appear to depict South America and even Antarctica with surprising accuracy long before modern exploration or mapping tools. Some argue the details have been exaggerated, but the mystery lingers. How could ancient map makers have known coastlines they had not reached? If accurate, such artifacts hint at knowledge far older than we expect, perhaps handed down from civilizations that appeared too soon and disappeared too quickly. Göbekli in modern-day Turkey deepens the puzzle. Dated to around 11,000 years ago, it predates agriculture, pottery, and writing, yet consists of massive stone pillars arranged in intricate circles, decorated with carvings of animals. By conventional timelines, hunter-gatherers should not have had the organization or surplus resources to create such a site. And yet there it stands. Some call it a temple, others a ritual center, but all agree it rewrites what we thought we knew about early societies. If humanity was an experiment, Göbekli looks like an early test run, a place where advanced knowledge appeared far earlier than expected. Similar anomalies exist worldwide. Stone structures in Peru, such as Sakai Waman, feature blocks of stone fitted so tightly that a knife cannot slip between them. The precision is astonishing, even by modern standards. Easter Island's Moai statues, massive heads carved and transported across the island, raise questions about tools and methods. The Nazca lines, vast geoglyphs etched into the desert, can only be fully appreciated from the air. These achievements often exceed what we assume small pre-industrial societies could manage. They suggest knowledge that either came too soon or from sources we do not fully understand. Mainstream scholars offer explanations, trial and error, cultural exchange, and the hidden capabilities of ancient peoples. And certainly, we should not underestimate human ingenuity. But from the perspective of the experiment framework, these bursts of advancement look suspicious. It's as if humanity was given sudden assignments. Civilizations planted in different regions as parallel tests, each equipped with knowledge and left to develop in their own directions. Even the legends of these civilizations often credit outsiders. Egyptians spoke of vism-bringing writing. The Sumerians described the Anunnaki descending from the heavens. Mesoamerican cultures spoke of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent who came with knowledge of agriculture and law. These figures may be myth, but they consistently describe beings who arrive, impart knowledge, and depart. That pattern is hard to ignore. It reads like intervention, like watchers stepping in to provide tools to the experiment before retreating to observe outcomes. Another intriguing detail is the recurrence of astronomical alignments in ancient monuments. From Stonehenge to the pyramids of Giza, from Machu Picchu to Teotihuacan, structures align with solstices, equinoxes, or specific stars. For early societies, survival depended on agriculture, which in turn depended on tracking the seasons. But the precision of these alignments suggests more than practical need. It suggests advanced knowledge of astronomy. How did people at the dawn of civilization track celestial movements with such accuracy? Were they guided, or did they inherit knowledge from an earlier lost source? If the experimenters were watching, perhaps they wanted to see how humans would use the gift of celestial awareness to measure time, to plan harvests, to mark rituals, to inspire myth. These civilizations also seem to share motifs, pyramids, ziggurats, mounds, and stepped platforms, all rising from the earth toward the sky. Found across continents with no clear connection, these structures suggest either shared human psychology or shared influence. Why do so many ancient societies separated by oceans choose the same architectural form? Perhaps it was instinct, or perhaps it was instruction. In the experiment lens, it looks like a repeated variable tested across multiple sites. The rise of civilizations that appear too soon isn't just about monuments and artifacts. It's also about knowledge encoded in myths, calendars, and sciences. The Mayan calendar, for example, displayed remarkable precision in tracking celestial cycles. Ancient Indian texts contain descriptions of cosmology that echo modern ideas about vast timescales and multiple universes. Greek philosophers speculated about atoms centuries before scientific proof. These intellectual leaps seem ahead of their time, as though ideas were seeded long before they could be fully understood. Critics argue that these are coincidences, or that we overinterpret ancient knowledge through modern eyes. But even if some claims are exaggerated, the cumulative pattern is striking. Time and again, we see societies leap forward, carrying tools and insights that don't fit neatly into gradual progress. If we see humanity as an experiment, then perhaps these civilizations were trials, different environments, different gifts of knowledge, different starting points. Some flourished for centuries, others collapsed quickly, but all left traces that still inspire awe. The experimenters may have been watching to see how each one handled its tools. Would advanced architecture lead to stability or arrogance? Would writing lead to wisdom or bureaucracy? Would astronomy lead to harmony with nature or to rigid priestly control? The outcomes varied, but the tests seemed deliberate. The idea that civilizations appeared too soon also ties into the broader question of lost knowledge. Did humanity once hold a higher level of understanding that was later forgotten? Flood myths, tales of golden ages, and scattered anomalies suggest that knowledge may have risen and fallen multiple times. If so, then the experiment is not linear, but cyclical, with civilizations planted, tested, and sometimes reset. Whether one believes in intervention or not, the archaeological record does show something undeniable. Humans are capable of sudden brilliance. Again and again, civilizations emerge with skills that seem disproportionate to their starting points. Whether this is the spark of human creativity or the touch of outside hands, it keeps the question alive. And once we've looked at these sudden appearances, it becomes hard not to ask why. If humanity was given a burst of knowledge, what was the purpose? Was it to test how we handle power? To see whether civilizations collapse under their own weight, or whether they learned balance? Or was it to prepare us for something larger? To build stepping stones toward a global civilization capable of looking back at the stars? Whatever the reason, these early societies leave us with more questions than answers. They are like puzzle pieces scattered across time, hints that the experiment may have been guided more directly than we realize. And with these civilizations in mind, the next step in the story leads us to consider the possibility that Earth itself is not just a home, but a classroom, a place where trials, challenges, and lessons are set for humanity to grow through. When people imagine life as an experiment, the thought can feel cold, like we are lab rats in a sterile environment. But there is another way to frame it, one that shows up again and again in philosophy, spirituality, and even science fiction. The idea that Earth itself is a classroom, a place where humanity isn't merely observed like a specimen, but tested, challenged, and taught, with the ultimate purpose being growth. In this framework, the trials of history, the struggles of daily life, even the strange leaps we've already traced, are less about random chance and more about lessons. If humanity is an experiment, then perhaps it is an educational one. The idea of Earth as a school appears in many traditions. In Hinduism and Buddhism, the cycle of birth and rebirth is often described as a process of learning. Life brings challenges. Karma is accumulated, and each lifetime offers the soul a chance to progress. The same theme shows up in Western mysticism, where Earth is seen as a proving ground for the soul, a place to cultivate virtues before moving on to higher realms. Even in more modern secular thought, people often describe hardship as a lesson, as though existence itself has a curriculum. When you think of life as a classroom, many puzzling aspects of human history begin to make more sense. Why is suffering such a constant? Why do civilizations rise and fall? Why do individuals face so many challenges that seem unnecessary for simple survival? If survival were the only goal, existence could have been designed to be easier, smoother, more uniform. But if the goal is education, then struggle becomes central. Lessons are rarely comfortable, and growth rarely happens without resistance. In the classroom Earth model, hardship is not a flaw. It is part of the structure. Consider the way history unfolds. Civilizations don't just grow in power. They're also tested. Corruption, inequality, greed, and hubris appear, and societies collapse if they fail to adapt. In this sense, history reads like a series of exams. Each culture is given tools, agriculture, writing, technology, and then left to see what it does with them. If it uses them wisely, it flourishes. If it misuses them, collapse follows, and the knowledge must be rebuilt in a new form. From the experiment perspective, this looks exactly like testing. Different groups, different conditions, the same basic question. How will humanity handle the gift of power at the personal level? The same pattern plays out. Every human life is filled with obstacles from illness to loss to conflict. These challenges are often random, unfair, or difficult to explain. But many people find meaning by interpreting them as lessons. Hardship teaches resilience, empathy, or wisdom. Failures show us the limits of arrogance. Relationships test our patience and compassion. In the classroom Earth model, every challenge becomes a part of the curriculum, designed not to punish, but to develop. This view even helps explain why consciousness itself is so puzzling. Awareness is not just about survival. It's about reflection, about learning. A wolf doesn't reflect on its mistakes, but a human does. That ability to examine oneself, to grow from experience, is what makes us suited for a classroom. Without consciousness, the lessons would pass unnoticed. With it, every event, good or bad, can be turned into understanding. There is also the question of diversity. Humanity is divided by culture, language, religion, and circumstance. Why so many differences? In the classroom framework, diversity becomes a feature, not a flaw. Each culture provides different lessons, different ways of seeing the world. Exposure to multiple perspectives challenges the mind, forcing it to grow. Conflict arises, yes, but so does innovation and empathy. A classroom with only one voice would be limited. A classroom with many is richer, harder, and ultimately more rewarding. Another aspect to consider is time. Why does human history stretch across thousands of years with progress measured in centuries? If the purpose were efficiency, the experiment could have been faster, but classrooms require time. Lessons take repetition, failure, and gradual development. Perhaps humanity is not meant to leap to its final form, but to grow through stages, each one building on the last. From tribal societies to global networks, each step adds to the lesson plan. Even the environment of Earth itself seems designed for this role. It is harsh enough to challenge, but forgiving enough to sustain. Natural disasters test resilience. Scarcity tests cooperation. Beauty inspires awe and creativity. The balance of difficulty and opportunity resembles a carefully crafted syllabus designed to push without destroying. If Earth were too easy, there would be no growth. If it were too harsh, humanity might never have survived. As it is, the conditions strike an odd balance as though calibrated for teaching. The classroom Earth hypothesis also casts watchers in a new light. If humanity is being observed, perhaps the watchers are not indifferent scientists, but teachers. Sometimes they intervene, providing guidance in the form of myths, revelations, or sudden leaps of knowledge. Other times they remain silent, letting the students work through problems on their own. Just as teachers do not give every answer, the watchers might offer only hints. Enough to guide, but not enough to remove the struggle. Think about how many myths describe gods or higher beings testing humans. In Greek mythology, gods disguise themselves to see how mortals behave. In the Bible, figures like Abraham or Job are tested with trials to measure faith. In countless folk tales, spirits or deities appear to reward kindness or punish arrogance. These stories, though symbolic, mirror the structure of a classroom. The students are given challenges, their choices are observed, and the lessons follow. In more modern times, the classroom model even appears in science fiction. Stories of simulated realities, alien experiments, or future humans running ancestral tests all reflect the same theme. The world is not random. It is structured. We are participants in a program designed for learning. Some stories frame this as benevolent, others as cruel, but the structure is the same. Conditions are set, variables are tested, results are observed. Critics might argue that this is wishful thinking. Seeing life as a classroom provides comfort, a sense of purpose in suffering. But comfort does not necessarily mean falsehood. The question remains, why does human existence so consistently feel like a series of lessons? Why do myths, philosophies, and personal experiences align around the same metaphor? Perhaps it is projection, or perhaps it is recognition, an intuitive sense that we are part of something larger. If Earth is a classroom, then the curriculum seems to revolve around choice. Again and again, humanity is given tools that can be used for creation or destruction. Fire warms or burns. Agriculture feeds or enslaves. Technology connects or divides. Nuclear power lights cities or destroys them. The test is not in the tool itself, but in how it is used. Every advance is a lesson in responsibility. Every collapse is a failed exam teaching the same lesson again through hardship. This framework also reshapes how we think about progress. Instead of seeing history as a march toward a specific end, we can see it as a series of lessons building toward maturity. Each collapse is not the end, but a reset, a chance to relearn. Each golden age is not permanent, but provisional, a test of balance. The ultimate question may not be whether humanity survives, but whether it learns. And perhaps that is the true experiment. Not survival, not intelligence, not even technology, but learning. Can a species be given freedom, power, and awareness, and still choose to grow? Can it turn suffering into wisdom, diversity into cooperation, power into responsibility? If so, then the experiment succeeds. If not, then perhaps it resets, and the lesson begins again. The classroom Earth hypothesis also adds meaning to individual lives. Every hardship, every relationship, every success and failure becomes part of the lesson. People often feel that their struggles are senseless, but in this framework, they are not. They are assignments, not punishments. The exam may be hard, but it is designed to teach something vital. Even if we don't know the full curriculum, the idea that life itself is structured for growth provides a way to make sense of suffering without dismissing its reality. Of course, the hypothesis raises further questions. If Earth is a classroom, who are the teachers? Are they gods, extraterrestrials, advanced humans, or some force we cannot name? What happens when the lesson is learned? Do individuals graduate through death into another realm? Does humanity as a whole advance to a new stage of existence? The answers vary depending on the tradition, but the structure remains. Life is not random. It is formative. And as we think about classrooms, it is natural to think of tests. For humanity, the tests might be global. Climate change, nuclear weapons, pandemics. These are challenges that test cooperation, foresight, and responsibility on a scale larger than any one nation. They are collective exams pushing humanity to see whether it can act as one. If we pass, we move forward. If we fail, the experiment may reset and the lesson repeats. The idea of Earth as a classroom is not provable, but it resonates. It explains the pattern of sudden leaps, the presence of suffering, the role of watchers, and the persistence of myths about tests and trials. It reframes existence from meaningless chaos into meaningful challenge, and whether or not it is true in the literal sense. It provides a powerful lens for understanding human experience. Once we adopt that lens, another question arises. If this is a classroom, where are the hints left for us? In schools, teachers often leave clues, notes, or guides to help students along. Perhaps the universe does the same. Perhaps signals have been left in the stars themselves, subtle breadcrumbs pointing us toward the larger picture. And so from the idea of Earth as a classroom, the story of the experiment flows naturally outward to the sky above, where signals may be waiting for us to notice. For as long as humans have looked up at the night sky, the stars have been more than distant points of light. They have been teachers, calendarers, gods, and guides. Farmers watched them to know when to plant. Sailors followed them across oceans. Priests aligned temples to their rising and setting. But beyond all of these practical roles, the stars have also carried a sense of mystery, as if they are trying to tell us something. If humanity is part of an experiment, then perhaps the sky itself is one of the places where the experimenters left their marks, a kind of cosmic blackboard where signals could be written large enough for us to notice. The first kind of signal is the obvious one: patterns. Constellations are human inventions, lines we draw between stars to tell stories. But the stars themselves are arranged in ways that have guided imagination for millennia. The belt of Orion, the bright curve of the Big Dipper, the shimmering band of the Milky Way. These formations are not just random scatterings to the human eye. They carry meaning. Cultures across the world, separated by oceans, came up with similar stories about the same clusters. Orion appears as a hunter in Greek mythology, and in other places as warriors or giants. A Ply-star cluster appears in myths from Japan to the Americas, often as a group of sisters. Why do these patterns feel so important? One explanation is simple human psychology. We look for shapes. Another possibility, though, is that the stars were arranged in such a way that we could not help but notice. If you wanted to leave signals for a young civilization, you might place them where they couldn't be missed. In the sky, above their heads. Beyond shapes, there are alignments. Ancient monuments around the world are carefully aligned to stars and celestial events. The pyramids of Giza line up with Orion's belt. Stonehenge marked solstices. Temples in Central America were built to catch the rising sun on equinoxes, casting shadows that turned staircases into serpents of light. These alignments were practical, yes, helping track time and seasons, but their precision suggests something deeper, as if ancient people were told to look upward, to connect their earthly works with the heavens. In the experiment framework, this could be interpreted as a breadcrumb trail. Build here, align this way, watch the sky, and you will find meaning. There are also the mathematical puzzles encoded in celestial cycles. The Maya tracked the motions of Venus with astonishing accuracy, producing calendars that rival modern ones in precision. Ancient Indian astronomers describe planetary orbits with uncanny detail. The Dune people of West Africa, long before modern telescopes spoke of Sirius having a hidden companion star, something only confirmed in the 20th century. Mainstream scholars debate these accounts, but they raise the question, how did early societies know so much? Was it careful observation alone, or were they inheriting signals, fragments of knowledge left for them to uncover? Modern science has joined the search for signals in the stars in a literal way. The SETI program, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, has spent decades scanning the sky for radio signals that might indicate communication. So far, the search has produced intriguing blips like the famous WOW signal detected in 1977, but no confirmed messages. Still, the very effort reflects the same intuition ancient people had. The stars might carry signals for us. If the experimenters exist, perhaps they have already sent messages encoded in ways we don't yet know how to read. Some thinkers even speculate that physics itself might be a signal. The constants of nature, the speed of light, the strength of gravity, the ratios of particle masses appear finely tuned for life. If they were even slightly different, stars might not burn, atoms might not form, and life as we know it would be impossible. To some, this is a coincidence. To others, it suggests a designer. And to those who see life as an experiment, the fine-tuning could be the ultimate signal. Proof written into the fabric of the cosmos that the conditions were set intentionally. The idea of signals in the stars also appears in myths. Many traditions describe ancestors or gods descending from the heavens or promise that wisdom will return from the stars. The Egyptians associated Osiris with Orion and Isis with Sirius. The Navajo saw the Milky Way as a pathway of spirits. The Maori traced their origins to star clusters. These stories often frame the stars not as distant, but as connected to human destiny, as if they are part of the same story. If myths are echoes of contact, then perhaps the stars were meant to remind us where to look. Even the phenomenon of inspiration seems tied to the sky. Artists, poets, and scientists alike often describe looking up at the stars and feeling ideas flow. Van Gogh painted the swirling night sky. Philosophers like Kant wrote about the starry heavens above as a source of awe. Astronomers dedicate their lives to studying the heavens, driven by curiosity that never seems to fade. Why do the stars exert such pull on the human mind? If we were designed to learn, then perhaps the stars are part of the curriculum, an endless puzzle, a canvas of signals meant to draw us outward. It is also worth considering how stars function in terms of time. Light from distant stars takes thousands or millions of years to reach us. When we look at them, we see the past. If advanced beings wanted to communicate across time as well as space, the stars could serve as carriers. Imagine encoding information not in radio signals, but in the light of stars, in the patterns of their flickers. Some scientists have even suggested searching for such techno-signatures, signals hidden in starlight itself. If humanity is being tested, then perhaps one part of the test is to notice these possibilities, to realize that the universe itself may carry messages. Skeptics, of course, argue that we project meaning onto randomness. Stars are scattered by physics, not arranged for us. Alignments are coincidences, knowledge is accumulated slowly, and fine-tuning is just one outcome among many possible universes. And they may be right, but what matters for the experiment idea is not certainty, but possibility. The consistency of humanity's instinct to look to the stars for meaning suggests that at the very least the experiment was designed to encourage curiosity. Whether the signals are real or imagined, the effect is the same. We are drawn upward, compelled to search. Another way to think of signals is in terms of thresholds. Humanity reaches certain stages of development, and suddenly new parts of the sky open up. The telescope expanded our vision. The radio revealed invisible waves. Spacecraft carried us into orbit and beyond. Each stage feels like unlocking a new level in the experiment, and with each level, new signals appear. Moons, planets, galaxies, cosmic background radiation. All of them are pieces of a vast puzzle waiting for us to notice. If the watchers are guiding us, perhaps they structured the universe as a series of signals revealed only when we are ready to see them. The possibility of hidden signals also adds intrigue. What if the messages are there, but encoded in mathematics, physics, or even biology in ways we haven't deciphered yet? Just as ancient people aligned temples without knowing they were embedding astronomical knowledge, perhaps we are surrounded by signals we don't yet understand. Discovering them could be part of the test, part of the lesson written into the stars. This way of thinking doesn't end with distant galaxies. Even our own solar system may carry signals. The placement of planets, the harmony of orbits, the peculiar features of moons. Some patterns seem almost too elegant to ignore. The resonance of Jupiter's moons, the strange tilt of Uranus, the perfect eclipses caused by the moon covering the sun. These may all be coincidences, but in the classroom Earth model, they could also be deliberate, designed to draw our attention, to inspire us to ask questions, to keep us searching. And when we consider signals in the stars, it naturally leads to the question of who might be leaving them. If there are watchers, then perhaps they are also messengers. Perhaps the stars themselves are their chosen medium. And if humanity is meant to read these signals, then our progress as a species may depend not just on survival or technology, but on interpretation. Can we learn to read the sky not just as a map for navigation, but as a message about our place in the universe? The search for signals may never end because each discovery opens more questions, but that in itself could be the purpose. In a classroom, teachers don't always provide final answers. They provide problems that generate more exploration. The stars, with their endless depth and mystery, may be the ultimate problem set designed to keep humanity reaching, wondering, and learning. And as we keep reaching, another possibility emerges. If signals in the stars suggest that someone out there has left messages for us, then perhaps the experiment isn't only about external guidance. Perhaps it's about cycles of time with the experimenters not as strangers from other worlds, but as versions of ourselves sending signals backward. And so the story of the experiment shifts again from stars as messages from others to stars as mirrors of our own future, reflecting the idea that we may be both the subjects and the designers of the test. One of the more intriguing possibilities in the discussion of humanity as an experiment is that the experimenters might not be strangers from distant galaxies at all. They might be us. Not the humans we know today, but future humans evolved, advanced, and looking back on their own origins. It's an idea that stretches the imagination, but it also ties neatly into both science and myth. If technology continues to progress, if our species survives long enough, then the ability to reach back into the past may one day become as ordinary for them as looking through a microscope is for us. And if that is true, then we might not be waiting for aliens to explain our mysteries. We might be living inside the field notes of our own descendants. The possibility begins with time itself. Physics has never fully closed the door on the idea of time travel. General relativity allows for solutions where time loops are possible through concepts like wormholes or warped spacetime. The details are mind-bending, but the core idea is that the laws of the universe do not entirely forbid journeys into the past. Whether such journeys could ever be practical is another question, but the fact that they are not ruled out makes the speculation tempting. If a far future civilization of humans mastered this, why wouldn't they look back on their beginnings? Scientists today routinely study fossils, genetic ancestry, and archaeological remains. Future humans with technologies beyond our imagination could take that curiosity much further. One interpretation of this idea is the simulation model. Instead of physically traveling back, future humans might run simulations of the past. Already researchers run computer models of ecosystems, weather patterns, and even human societies in miniature. With enough computing power, a simulation of the past could become indistinguishable from reality, at least to those inside it. Philosophers have even argued that if such simulations are possible, the odds are high. We are living in one right now. In that case, the experimenters are not distant gods or aliens, but programmers. Our own descendants running simulations to learn about their past. Our lives then are not random, but coded tests in a grand ancestral study. Another possibility is more direct physical observation. Future humans using time-bending technology might send probes, or even themselves back to key points in history. If so, what would they look like to us? Perhaps not as future humans at all, but as the mysterious beings described in myths, tall strangers descending from the skies, teachers of agriculture and law, givers of fire and knowledge. To ancient eyes, these visitors would appear divine. To us, they might be recognizable as advanced versions of ourselves. In the experiment framework, these visitations could be interpreted as check-ins from future observers, making sure the timeline unfolded in the way they expected. This could even explain the watcher motif we've already traced. If beings from above seem strangely invested in our progress, maybe it's because they are personally connected. Maybe they are not just curious scientists, but caretakers of their own lineage, ensuring that their ancestors make the choices that will eventually lead to them. This makes the experiment personal. It's not just about observing a random species. It's about preserving a chain of cause and effect that allows the watchers to exist in the first place. There are also genetic clues that lend themselves to this interpretation. We've already noted the sudden leaps in human DNA, the rapid changes in genes connected to brain development, the unusual fusion of chromosomes. Some researchers speculate that these could be evidence of intervention. But if future humans had the ability to manipulate genetics, they might have seeded these changes themselves, ensuring that their own lineage evolved the way it needed to. In this view, humanity's evolutionary oddities are not signs of alien tinkering, but deliberate adjustments by our own future selves. Even the myths of gods creating humans from clay or giving them knowledge could be echoes of such interventions. Imagine a group of early humans encountering advanced descendants who showed them how to plant crops or who altered their genetic code in ways they could never understand. The memory of such events would filter through culture as stories of gods shaping, teaching, and guiding. In this way, myths may not be entirely imaginary. They could be distorted records of real encounters with future humans. Skeptics will point out that the paradoxes of time travel make this unlikely. If future humans interfered with the past, wouldn't that risk erasing their own existence? But some physicists argue that time may be more flexible. Instead of erasing, interventions might create branches or loops, alternate timelines that coexist. If that is the case, then future humans might be running countless experiments, tweaking variables in the past to see what different outcomes emerge. Each version of history would be its own experiment, and we would be living in one branch of many. This interpretation also reshapes the way we see UFOs and other modern mysteries. Many descriptions of so-called aliens include features that are not entirely foreign, but oddly human-like. Bipedal forms, recognizable eyes, hands, and heads. Critics argue that this is projection, but another explanation is that they are not aliens at all. They are us, evolved and altered by time, returning to observe. Their interest in human biology, often reported in abduction accounts, could reflect a focus on their own ancestry. If the experiment is being run by future humans, then their motives are deeply tied to themselves. What makes this idea compelling is how neatly it ties into our own behavior. We already look back obsessively. Archaeologists dig into ruins. Geneticists trace ancestry. Paleontologists reconstruct entire species from bones. Historians pore over records to understand societies long gone. If we are this fascinated with our past, why wouldn't our descendants be? If they had the ability to move through time or simulate history, studying their ancestors might be irresistible. And just as we keep meticulous records of our findings, perhaps they keep records of us monitoring how their lineage once lived, loved, fought, and learned. The ethical dimension of this possibility is interesting as well. If future humans are observing us, do they see us as equals, as ancestors, or as test subjects? Would they intervene to prevent disasters, or would they allow suffering in the name of preserving history? If we are their ancestors, do they feel responsibility toward us? Or do they see us as distant enough to study without interference? These questions mirror the ones we ask about our own treatment of history in animals. Do we have obligations to the beings we study? Or does curiosity override? There's also the strange possibility that our awareness of this idea is itself part of the experiment. By speculating about time travel, by writing stories and theories about future humans, we might be responding to subtle signals they've left for us. Science fiction often seems to anticipate real discoveries. Submarines, rockets, artificial intelligence. Perhaps our imagination about future humans looking back is not just fiction, but intuition nudged into us as part of the curriculum of the experiment. Another layer of this theory involves simulations within simulations. If future humans are running experiments on their ancestors, and we ourselves develop the ability to do the same, then the chain becomes infinite. Each generation creates simulations of the past within which new beings imagine simulations of their own. The experiment becomes recursive, layers upon layers, until the question of what real losses mean. Are we the original or already one of the many simulations? If the watchers are future humans, they might themselves be watched by even later humans, continuing the cycle endlessly. The notion of future humans looking back also raises the question of purpose. What would they hope to learn from us? Perhaps they want to understand how consciousness first emerged, or how civilizations rose and fell. Perhaps they are studying morality, seeing how their ancestors handled power and suffering. Or perhaps they are searching for points of divergence, trying to identify where choices led toward their future or away from it. In any case, the experiment would not be abstract. It would be deeply tied to their own identity. And if that is true, then our actions matter in ways we rarely imagine. Every choice we make could be a data point in a study conducted far beyond our comprehension. Our struggles, our triumphs, our failures, all of them might be lessons not only for us, but for the humans who come after, looping back to watch. This doesn't mean we lack freedom. If anything, it adds weight to our freedom because every choice becomes a message to the future, a signal to the watchers about who their ancestors were. Of course, this idea is unsettling for some. It suggests that our privacy is an illusion, that even our most intimate thoughts and moments could be observed by distant descendants. But others find it oddly comforting. If future humans are watching, it means we survived. It means that despite wars, crises, and uncertainties, humanity made it far enough to look back. The very existence of watchers from the future would be proof that the experiment succeeded at least once. This way of thinking also connects to myths of return. Many traditions speak of a time when gods or ancestors will come back, bringing wisdom or judgment. If these stories are distorted memories of future humans visiting the past, then the promised return may be less about divine intervention and more about another loop in the timeline. What ancient people described as gods returning may have been their own descendants arriving again. The idea of future humans watching us ties the experiment into a closed loop. We are not just subjects of distant intelligences. We are participants in a cycle where we may one day become the watchers ourselves. The experiment may not be imposed from outside, but grown from within. Humanity testing and teaching itself across time. And as strange as that sounds, it fits the patterns we've already seen. Leaps in knowledge, myths of visitors, signals in the stars, all could be echoes of humanity's own hand reaching backward through time. Thinking this way naturally leads to the next question. If we are observed, whether by future humans or other beings, what is the nature of the observation? Are we specimens in a zoo living out our lives in an enclosure while the watchers peer through invisible glass? Or are we partners in something larger, participants in a grand experiment designed not only to study us, but to see how life itself unfolds? And so the story of the experiment carries us forward into another unsettling possibility that we may not be alone on Earth, but inhabitants of a vast reserve carefully monitored in ways we barely perceive. There is a theory in discussions about extraterrestrial life that often captures people's imagination, partly because of its simplicity and partly because of how disturbingly plausible it feels. It is known as the zoo theory, and it suggests that humanity may not be isolated by accident, but intentionally, like animals placed in a reserve. In this view, advanced civilizations or watchers of some kind are fully aware of our existence, yet deliberately avoid direct contact. The reason isn't indifference or hostility, but something subtler. They may want to observe us without interference, the way humans build nature reserves or zoological parks to study animals in controlled but natural conditions. At first glance, The idea might sound insulting. Nobody likes to imagine themselves as an animal in an enclosure. But if we step back, it also makes a certain kind of sense. When humans observe other species, we rarely tell them they're being watched. We don't walk up to a lion and explain the concept of conservation. We build viewing platforms, hide cameras, or monitor from afar. We want to see the animals behave naturally without changing their behavior by announcing our presence. If advanced beings are watching us, perhaps they follow the same principle. Contact would alter the experiment. Observation without interference keeps it pure. The zoo theory fits neatly with the Fermi paradox. The question of why, given the vastness of the universe and the likelihood of countless civilizations, we haven't seen clear evidence of any. The simplest answer is that they are deliberately staying silent. It's not that they aren't there, it's that they have rules, like zookeepers, about not disturbing the inhabitants of the enclosure. This makes Earth less of a lonely outpost and more of a carefully managed reserve set aside for study. When we look at our own behavior, the parallel becomes even clearer. We've created entire reserves where animals live without realizing they are being observed. We tag birds with transmitters, monitor elephant migrations with satellites, and film hidden footage of gorillas in the wild. The animals go about their lives unaware of the eyes watching from a distance. Some even live in artificial habitats that resemble their natural environments, never knowing the difference. If we do this, why wouldn't more advanced beings do the same to us? Certain features of human history even feel consistent with the zoo model. The absence of undeniable extraterrestrial contact could be a rule, a non-inference directive to preserve our natural development. The occasional anomalies, strange sightings, myths of sky beings, fleeting encounters, could be moments when the watchers got too close or when the boundaries of the enclosure blurred. Just as animals sometimes glimpse their keepers, perhaps humans occasionally glimpse the watchers enough to spark myths, religions, or UFO stories, but never enough for certainty. The zoo theory also explains why, despite our technological progress, we haven't made official contact. Perhaps we aren't ready. In a zoo, you don't explain human society to the animals. You let them grow, breed, fight, and adapt within their environment. Only when they reach a certain threshold, say the ability to understand language or interact without harm, would you consider deeper engagement. For humanity, that threshold might be global unity, stable cooperation, or even interstellar travel. Until then, the watchers might see us as too immature for open contact. There's also a psychological dimension to this. Imagine if tomorrow undeniable evidence appeared that we are part of a cosmic zoo, that beings beyond our comprehension have been watching us silently for millennia. The impact would be enormous. Religions would be shaken, governments destabilized, identities fractured. Civilization might collapse under the weight of knowledge. From that perspective, withholding contact could be seen as compassionate. The experiment only works if we grow naturally, not if we crumble under sudden revelation. The zoo model also gives a new lens for myths and ancient encounters. If watchers occasionally checked in, perhaps to adjust variables or to study us more closely, their appearances would have seemed divine. Stories of gods descending, angels visiting, or sky people teaching could all be interpreted as moments when the zookeepers entered the enclosure. To the inhabitants, those moments would become foundational myths. To the watchers, they might have been simple fieldwork. Some even speculate that certain human institutions echo this structure. Priesthoods, kingship, or secret societies could have been influenced by contact with watchers who left knowledge in the hands of a few rather than the many. In that sense, the zoo isn't just an enclosure. It's a layered system with some inhabitants given glimpses of the keepers, while the majority remain unaware. Whether or not that is true, the possibility lingers that unequal contact is part of the experiment. A question that naturally follows is, what is the purpose of this zoo? Why keep humanity in such an arrangement? One answer is simple curiosity. Just as humans study animals to learn about behavior, ecology, and evolution, perhaps watchers study us to learn about consciousness, morality, and civilization. Another answer is preservation. Maybe humanity is rare in the cosmos, and our existence is worth protecting, even if only as a sample of what intelligent life can look like. A third answer could be testing. Perhaps Earth is one of many enclosures, each seeded with different conditions, to see how civilizations develop. In that frame, we're not just watched, but compared. There's also the unsettling possibility that we are entertainment. Zoos are not only for science, they're also for amusement. Crowds watch animals play, fight, and mate. If watchers are advanced enough, maybe our wars, dramas, and stories are fascinating to them. This idea makes many uncomfortable, but it cannot be dismissed. To a vastly superior intelligence, our greatest struggles might look like the antics of animals in an enclosure. Of course, the zoo theory has critics. Some argue it makes humanity sound too passive, stripping us of agency. Others point out that if beings are advanced enough to maintain such a system, surely they could conceal it perfectly, leaving no myths, no sightings, no slips. And yet, as with all aspects of the experiment idea, the lack of proof does not erase the consistency of the pattern. Humanity's persistent intuition of watchers, myths of intervention, and the silence of the stars all line up neatly with the zoo hypothesis. Interestingly, the zoo idea also reframes our attempts at contact. Efforts like broadcasting messages to the stars might not be ignored because nobody hears them, but because it breaks the rules. Imagine animals in a zoo suddenly learning to send letters to their keepers. The keepers might acknowledge the effort, but still choose not to respond until the time is right. Our search for contact could be part of the test. Will humanity keep reaching outward, even without an answer? If the zoo model is true, then humanity faces an interesting future at some point. Perhaps when we've matured enough, the watchers may decide to reveal themselves. What would count as maturity is unclear. Perhaps a unified planet, peaceful cooperation, or mastery of our environment without destroying it. Until then, we may remain in the enclosure, watched but not greeted. That thought may feel unsettling, but it also carries hope. It means that progress matters not only for ourselves, but for the possibility of finally stepping out of the zoo. This interpretation also softens some of the harsher aspects of the experiment idea. If we are in a zoo, it doesn't necessarily mean cruelty. Zoos at their best are built to protect endangered species, to give them space to live without immediate extinction. If humanity is rare, perhaps the watchers are preserving us, letting us grow in a safe enclosure until we are ready to join the wider cosmos. The suffering we endure might still be part of the process, but the ultimate goal could be preservation rather than exploitation. At the same time, the zoo theory raises ethical questions. If humanity is being observed, is it right to withhold knowledge from us? Wouldn't contact, guidance, or support help us grow faster? Or would it distort the natural process too much? These are the same debates humans have about animals in reserves. Do we intervene to save them from danger, or let them struggle to preserve natural behavior? If the watchers face similar dilemmas, then perhaps their silence is not indifference, but restraint. And if we are in a zoo, then the environment itself becomes part of the design. Earth's conditions, the mix of resources, challenges, and beauty, might not be random. They might be carefully chosen to create the right testing ground. Each mountain, ocean, and desert could be part of the enclosure, calibrated to push humanity toward growth. In this light, the zoo is not just about separation from the universe, but about shaping the conditions of life itself. Thinking this way leads to another question. What happens when the animals of the zoo realize they are in one? If humanity begins to suspect it is observed, how does that change behavior? Do we become paranoid, defiant, or inspired? Do we lose hope? Or do we strive harder to prove ourselves? Perhaps that is part of the experiment as well, to see how a species reacts when it begins to glimpse the bars of its enclosure. And from here, the story of humanity as an experiment takes another turn. Because if life in the zoo feels carefully controlled, then suffering becomes a central issue. Why would watchers allow so much pain, so much conflict, so many disasters? If they are advanced enough to observe without us noticing, they could surely prevent the worst of our suffering. And yet, they do not. This suggests that suffering, however harsh, might be part of the design, part of the test itself. And so the experiment continues into one of its most difficult questions. The problem of suffering, and why a species allowed to struggle, might be exactly what the watchers want to see. One of the hardest questions to face when imagining humanity as an experiment is why our world contains so much suffering. If we were designed, if conditions were set intentionally, then pain cannot be dismissed as an accident. It would be part of the structure, part of the curriculum. And that realization is not easy. Wars, diseases, natural disasters, cruelty, loss. If there are watchers, why would they allow such things? Why would an experiment designed to foster growth or learning rely so heavily on hardship? At first glance, suffering seems needless. Animals struggle to survive. But humans carry suffering in an additional dimension. We don't only feel pain. We reflect on it, anticipate it, and grieve it even before it arrives. We suffer in body and in mind, sometimes from things that have not even happened yet. This ability to worry, to imagine disaster, to replay trauma endlessly, it is uniquely human. It shapes art, religion, philosophy, and politics. It also breaks people. If the experiment were simply about survival, such deep suffering would be unnecessary. So why is it here? One explanation is that suffering is the sharpest teacher. Lessons learned in comfort are often shallow. Lessons learned in pain leave marks that last a lifetime. If the purpose of the experiment is to test character, morality, or resilience, then suffering is a powerful tool. Through it, humans discover compassion, strength, endurance, and creativity. Some of history's greatest breakthroughs have come from times of crisis. Medicines discovered to fight plagues, new technologies born from war, revolutions sparked by oppression. From this perspective, suffering pushes humanity forward, forcing it to grow in ways it would not if life were easy. At the personal level, the same pattern appears. People often say they learned the most about themselves during their hardest times. A loss that seemed unbearable became the source of wisdom. A failure that humiliated became the foundation for growth. A hardship that broke their plans revealed inner strength they didn't know they had. This doesn't erase the pain, but it does show how suffering can be transformative. In the classroom Earth model, pain is not a flaw in the system. It is part of the assignment. Religions have long grappled with this question. In Christianity, suffering is often framed as a test of faith or as a way to share in the trials of Christ. In Buddhism, suffering is the central truth of existence, something to be understood and transcended. In Hinduism, suffering is tied to karma, the result of past actions and a step toward liberation. In Islam, hardship is a test of patience and trust in God. Across traditions, the pattern repeats. Suffering is not meaningless. It is a lesson. The experiment framework echoes these teachings, but with a secular twist. Suffering is not divine punishment, but part of the parameters set by whoever runs the test. The idea that suffering is intentional raises unsettling ethical questions. If watchers exist, are they cruel for allowing so much pain? Or are they beyond our concepts of cruelty, treating us as we treat animals in labs? When scientists run experiments, they often expose animals to stress, hunger, or even harm to learn how they react. From the human perspective, this is justified in the name of knowledge. But from the animal's perspective, it is suffering without reason. Could we be in the same position, unable to see the reasons for our pain because they belong to minds far beyond ours? This possibility is uncomfortable, but it resonates with the patterns we see. Disasters that wipe out millions, wars that devastate civilizations, diseases that torment for centuries. These could all be seen as tests of resilience. How will humanity respond? Will it collapse or adapt? Will it descend into despair or rise with new determination? The watchers may be less concerned with the events themselves than with the outcomes, the choices made under pressure. There is also the argument that suffering creates meaning. Without darkness, light loses its value. Without hardship, joy becomes shallow. A life without pain might be easier, but it might also be empty. If the experiment is about meaning, then suffering is the contrast that allows meaning to emerge. Birth is precious because death exists. Love is powerful because loss is possible. Courage is admirable because fear is real. In this view, suffering is the background against which humanity paints its most meaningful moments. Another dimension of suffering is empathy. Humans are unique in the depth of their compassion for others. We cry for strangers in distant lands, for fictional characters in books, for animals in pain. This empathy grows directly out of our capacity to suffer. Because we know pain ourselves, we recognize it in others. If the experiment is designed to test morality, then suffering may be the mechanism that makes morality possible. Without it, we would be indifferent. With it, we are capable of kindness and sacrifice. Still, the scale of suffering raises doubts. If the point is to teach empathy or resilience, why so much? Why plagues that kill millions? Wars that devastate continents? Disasters that erase entire cities? Couldn't the lesson be learned with less? Perhaps. But large-scale suffering may test collectives rather than individuals. It forces entire societies to cooperate, to innovate, or to fail. It may be that the watchers are not only testing people, but cultures, civilizations, and humanity as a whole. Even natural suffering fits this frame. Earthquakes, floods, volcanoes, and storms push humans to adapt to their environment. They create challenges that require engineering, planning, and cooperation. They also remind us that we're not in control, humbling us in the face of nature. If Earth is an enclosure, then these features may not be accidents. They may be built-in obstacles calibrated to test adaptability. Some thinkers suggest suffering might even be data. The watchers may not be focused on outcomes at all, but on the raw experience of pain itself. Just as neuroscientists study how animals respond to stress, perhaps advanced beings study how consciousness processes suffering. Our pain, in this unsettling view, could be the very thing they're interested in. Every cry, every tear, every act of endurance becomes part of the record, a sample of what awareness does under strain. This is a grim interpretation, but it matches how humans behave with their own experiments. We expose rats to mazes with shocks, primates to isolation, and plants to drought. We don't do this because we hate them, but because we want to know how systems respond. If we treat other beings this way, why wouldn't others treat us the same? From their perspective, our suffering may be fascinating data. And yet, suffering also produces beauty. Out of pain comes art, music, and literature. Some of the greatest works in human history were born from anguish. Beethoven wrote symphonies while deaf. Van Gogh painted while tormented by mental illness. Writers poured grief into novels and poetry that still move us centuries later. If the experiment is about creativity, then suffering may be the spark. It forces the mind to seek expression, to turn agony into something lasting. Suffering also fuels innovation. Many technologies were invented to ease pain or solve crises. Medicine arose from the need to heal disease. Agricultural improvements came from the need to avoid famine. Communication technologies accelerated in times of war. Necessity driven by suffering has been the mother of invention. In this way, pain becomes progress. If the experimenters wanted humanity to advance quickly, suffering would be an efficient catalyst. Of course, none of this justifies suffering to those experiencing it. For the person in pain, explanations bring little comfort. But in the broader view, Suffering may be the crucible that shapes humanity into what it is meant to become. Whether we see this as cruel or purposeful depends on perspective. From inside, it feels unfair. From the outside, it may look necessary. There is also the strange fact that humans often create suffering for each other. Wars, oppression, exploitation. These are not natural disasters, but human choices. If the experiment includes free will, then suffering becomes a way to measure how we use it. Do we choose cruelty or compassion? Do we create systems that reduce pain or systems that amplify it? Each decision becomes part of the test. The hardest question is whether suffering ever ends. If Earth is a classroom, does graduation mean a release from pain? Many religions promise this heaven non-emotia. If humanity passes the test, perhaps the next stage of existence is freer, lighter. But if we fail, perhaps the suffering continues in cycles of collapse and rebirth until the lessons are learned. This uncertainty is part of the weight of existence. What suffering does undeniably is make us ask questions. Why me? Why now? Why us? These questions drive philosophy, religion, and science. They push us to search for meaning, to invent stories of gods, to discover medicine, to build systems of law. In that sense, suffering may be the engine of progress. Without it, we might never have wondered enough to look upward, to ask if we are part of an experiment at all. And once we ask that question, the next becomes inevitable. If suffering is part of the experiment, do the watchers ever intervene directly to shape it? Are there moments when they reduce it or amplify it, or send messengers to help us endure it? Myths and modern stories alike are filled with accounts of contact. Prophets receiving visions, mysterious beings offering guidance, people encountering strange visitors in the night. If suffering is the test, then perhaps these moments of contact are the hints, the support, the interventions that keep humanity moving forward. If suffering is one of the great constants of human existence, then so is the belief that we are not entirely alone in facing it. Throughout history, there have been moments when people claim to have received guidance, visions, or encounters with beings beyond ordinary human life. Some describe these experiences as divine revelations, others as meetings with extraterrestrials, and still others as personal visions. However they are interpreted, these moments of contact sit at the crossroads of myth, religion, and modern mystery. And if we think of humanity as an experiment, they may be the clearest signs that the watchers occasionally step out of the shadows. Consider the ancient prophets. In the Hebrew Bible, figures like Moses, Isaiah, and Ezekiel describe direct encounters with God or with angels. Moses speaks to a burning bush that commands him to lead a people to freedom. Ezekiel describes a vision of a flying chariot, wheels within wheels with strange beings beside it. To believers, these are divine revelations. To skeptics, they are symbolic or hallucinatory. But within the experiment framework, they could also be interpreted as controlled contact. Perhaps at critical points in history, watchers intervene through visions or manifestations, steering humanity in new directions. In other traditions, similar stories abound. In Greek mythology, gods appear to mortals with advice, commands, or gifts. Athena guides Odysseus. Hermes delivers messages. Zeus punishes arrogance. These aren't distant deities, but active participants in human affairs, stepping in at pivotal moments. In Hinduism, avatars of Vishnu descend to restore balance when the world falls into chaos. In Buddhism, enlightenment often comes through visions or encounters with celestial beings. Across cultures, the theme repeats. The watchers don't just observe. Sometimes they make themselves known. Modern times provide their own examples. Accounts of UFO sightings, alien abductions, and close encounters often describe beings who seem more like experimenters than conquerors. Witnesses speak of medical examinations, telepathic communication, and messages about the future of humanity. These stories are controversial and often dismissed, but their details echo ancient accounts of contact. Whether angels or aliens, the core imagery is the same. beings beyond us arriving briefly, leaving behind confusion or fear. Some encounters seem designed not to dominate, but to test. Abduction accounts often describe procedures that resemble experiments: the collection of samples, the examination of bodies, the insertion of strange devices. From a human perspective, this feels invasive and traumatic. But from the experiment's perspective, it looks familiar. We do the same to animals in labs, tagging, testing, and releasing them. If we accept that possibility, then these encounters may not be accidents or fabrications, but glimpses of an ongoing process. There are also gentler versions of contact. Many people report mystical experiences, sudden visions of light, voices that offer comfort, dreams that feel more real than waking life. These experiences often occur during times of crisis or suffering. A dying person sees a bright figure welcoming them. A grieving parent dreams of a child with a reassuring message. A meditator feels the presence of guides or guardians. These moments are often dismissed as tricks of the brain, but they also fit neatly into the experiment framework. Perhaps the watchers provide support when the test becomes too heavy, reminding us that we're not entirely abandoned. Art and culture have long been shaped by such moments. The Quran is said to have been revealed to Muhammad by the angel Gabriel, dictating words that became a holy text. The Book of Mormon was dictated by Joseph Smith after encounters with angelic figures. Countless shamans across cultures report visions during trance states, bringing back guidance for their communities. These moments of contact often spark entire movements, reshaping societies. If watchers wanted to steer humanity without revealing themselves fully, this would be an effective method. Select individuals, provide visions, and let the ideas spread. Skeptics argue that these experiences are products of the mind. Hallucinations, dreams, or cultural imagination can explain much, but the consistency across cultures raises questions. Why do people in vastly different times and places describe such similar encounters? Bright beings, sky chariots, voices from above. The imagery repeats too often to be dismissed as random. It suggests a common source, one that might be the watches themselves. Another way to see these moments is as calibration points. In an experiment, researchers often check in to make sure variables are unfolding as intended. They adjust conditions, provide stimuli, or test responses. If humanity is the experiment, then contact moments could serve that role. Each vision, encounter, or revelation might be less about communication and more about calibration. How does a society respond to a prophet's message? How does an individual respond to an abduction experience? How does culture shift after a religious revelation? The watchers may be less interested in the content than in the reaction. It is also possible that many of these moments were not intended to be remembered. Just as animals in labs sometimes glimpse researchers, perhaps humans sometimes catch glimpses of the watchers unintentionally. These glimpses then become myths, legends, or paranormal stories. The watchers may not always want contact, but the complexity of the experiment means it cannot be perfectly hidden. The strange and unexplained encounters that pepper human history may be the result of those slips. Even in art and literature, we see traces of contact. Writers often describe inspiration as if it comes from outside themselves. The Greek idea of the muse embodies this. Creativity is a gift from divine sources. Many modern artists and musicians speak of ideas arriving suddenly, as though whispered by unseen hands. If consciousness is part of the experiment, then perhaps inspiration itself is another form of subtle contact, nudging human creativity in directions chosen by the watchers. Technology, too, has its strange leaps tied to moments of contact. Myths often describe gods teaching humans how to use fire, agriculture, or writing. Modern stories sometimes claim that sudden breakthroughs like the development of certain technologies were influenced by reverse-engineered alien contact. Whether these claims hold up or not, the recurring theme is that knowledge sometimes arrives not gradually, but suddenly as though gifted. If that is true, And contact may not only be about messages, but about tools. What makes these encounters so hard to interpret is that they rarely come with clarity. A prophet receives a message that is symbolic or obscure. A witness to a UFO leaves more confused than enlightened. A mystical vision provides comfort, but no explanation. It's as if the watchers deliberately withhold full knowledge, giving only fragments. This would make sense in an experiment. If the goal is growth, you don't hand the students the answers. You give hints, challenges, and puzzles, letting them work out the meaning for themselves. The persistence of contact experiences also changes how we think about modern spirituality. New religious movements often begin with visions or encounters. Individuals claim to receive guidance from higher beings, sometimes leading to small groups, sometimes to entire global movements. The watchers may not be guiding every detail, but they could be planting seeds, waiting to see how different groups respond. Each contact moment becomes another test, another branching path in the experiment. Of course, it's possible that all of this is projection. Humans are imaginative, prone to seeing patterns, and deeply hungry for meaning. Perhaps moments of contact are simply the mind's way of coping with uncertainty and suffering. But even if that's true, it still serves the same role in the experiment. The watchers don't need to intervene directly if humans create their own visions of contact. The belief itself shapes behavior, drives culture, and influences morality. In that sense, imagined contact is as powerful as real contact. Looking across history, one thing becomes clear. Contact moments, real or imagined, change the course of humanity. Religions rise, cultures shift, knowledge spreads, individuals find purpose. Whether from gods, aliens, ancestors, or the depths of the mind, these experiences carry weight. And in the framework of the experiment, that weight is the point. It's not about the truth of the encounter, but about its effect. This leads us naturally to the next layer of the story. Not just open moments of contact, but subtler forms of guidance. If the watchers are real, they may not always reveal themselves in visions or encounters. Sometimes their influence may be quieter, woven into the flow of history itself. Nudges at the right time, small pushes that alter the direction of culture without anyone realizing. These whispers of intervention may be even more important than the grand visions because they shape the experiment in ways we cannot easily trace. If we allow ourselves to imagine that humanity is an experiment, then sooner or later, the question of ethics arises even on Earth. When humans conduct experiments on animals or plants, or even on each other in controlled settings, ethical debates quickly follow. How much suffering is acceptable? How much manipulation can be justified in the name of knowledge? What obligations do experimenters owe to their subjects if there are watchers? And if they have shaped, guided, or tested us in any way, then the same questions must apply on a cosmic scale. What does it mean to run an experiment on an entire species? The first ethical concern is the one we already touched on: suffering. Humanity's history is soaked in it, from plagues to wars to personal grief. If the conditions of life were set intentionally, then suffering was built into the design. Is that defensible? On Earth, animal researchers are asked to minimize suffering, to provide enrichment, to avoid unnecessary harm. Ethical codes like the 3Rs, replace, reduce, refine, aim to ensure that experiments are humane. Do the watchers follow similar rules? Or is suffering not only tolerated, but required in their framework? If suffering is necessary for growth, as many traditions suggest, then perhaps the watchers see it as justified. Just as a doctor inflicts pain in surgery to heal, or a teacher allows students to struggle through difficult lessons, the watchers may allow suffering because they believe it leads to greater outcomes. But this justification assumes that the watchers value growth more than comfort. It assumes that the end justifies the means. For humans, that is already a difficult balance. On a cosmic scale, the weight of the question grows immense. Another ethical concern is free will. Do we truly choose our paths, or are we subtly manipulated by intervention, whispers, and conditions set long before we were born? If our choices are influenced by unseen hands, can they still be called free? On Earth, experiments often require informed consent. Human subjects in psychological or medical trials must agree to participate, understanding the risks. If humanity is in an experiment without consent, does that make the watchers unethical? Or is the experiment of such magnitude that consent is irrelevant? These are not easy questions, but they echo the same debates we have about our own scientific practices. Then there is the question of transparency. If watchers exist, they remain hidden. We are not told the rules of the experiment, the purpose, or the goals. We stumble in the dark, piecing together fragments, wondering whether we are alone. Is this secrecy ethical? On Earth, secrecy in experiments is often criticized. Subjects deserve to know they are being studied. And yet, secrecy is sometimes defended when revealing the truth would alter the results. If humans knew they were part of a cosmic experiment, would that destroy the validity of the test? Would our behavior change so much that the experiment would lose meaning? If so, the watchers may justify secrecy as essential, even if it feels deceptive. There is also the question of inequality. If some individuals or groups have received more contact, prophets, visionaries, abductees, then the experiment is not evenly distributed. Some are given knowledge, others are left in ignorance. Some suffer more, others less. On Earth, unequal treatment in experiments is a serious ethical violation. Yet in the cosmic experiment, inequality seems to be the rule. Was that intentional? Are certain groups tested differently? Or is the experiment more chaotic with randomness itself as part of the design? These dilemmas grow sharper when we compare them to human behavior. We run experiments on animals without their consent, often exposing them to stress or harm. We justify by saying the animals cannot understand that the knowledge gained will benefit others, that the greater good outweighs the suffering of a few. If the watchers see us the same way, then they may believe they are justified. We are too limited to understand, and the knowledge or growth produced by our struggles is worth the cost. But from our perspective, that justification is cold comfort. It suggests that our suffering is instrumental, not personal, a means to an end we may never see. Another angle is responsibility. If the watchers have shaped us, nudged us, or tested us, do they bear responsibility for the outcomes? If they gave us fire, are they responsible for every burn? If they nudged us toward technology, are they responsible for nuclear war? On Earth, researchers are accountable for the consequences of their experiments. They're expected to monitor outcomes and intervene if harm becomes too great. Do the watchers hold themselves to similar standards, or do they see responsibility differently, placing the burden entirely on us? Ethical debates also emerge around purpose. What is the goal of the experiment? If it is observation alone, then our suffering is data, our growth irrelevant. If it is education, then we are students in a curriculum. If it is preservation, then we are specimens in a reserve. Each purpose carries a different ethical weight. Education suggests benevolence. Observation suggests neutrality. And preservation suggests control. Without knowing the goal, we cannot judge the ethics fully. But the uncertainty itself is part of the tension. There is also the problem of scale. When researchers on Earth study bacteria, they don't consider the ethics of individual microbes. The scale is too small. If watchers are vastly beyond us, they may see us the same way. Too small, too simple, too fleeting for individual ethical concern. To them, humanity may be like ants, fascinating to observe, but not deserving of moral consideration. From their perspective, the very question of ethics may not apply, but from ours, it matters deeply. Some argue that the watchers, if they exist, must be benevolent. They point to moments of contact that bring comfort, to visions that inspire morality, to whispers that guide progress. They argue that the experiment is designed for our growth, not our exploitation. Others argue the opposite, that the watchers are indifferent or even exploitative, treating us as tools for their own purposes. Both views find evidence in history. The truth may lie somewhere in between, or in a framework we cannot yet imagine. Interestingly, the ethics of a cosmic experiment mirror debates in theology. The problem of evil, why a benevolent God allows suffering, is essentially the same question. Is suffering part of a plan or evidence of indifference? Religious answers vary, but the question persists. The experiment idea reframes it without assuming divinity, but the core issue remains. Is the design of life ethical? One unsettling possibility is that ethics, as we understand it, may not matter to the watchers. Just as human researchers once performed cruel experiments without considering animal suffering, perhaps the watchers do not consider our suffering relevant. To them, the experiment is knowledge, and knowledge justifies the means. If so, then the experiment may be less a school and more a laboratory, and our notions of right and wrong may be irrelevant to the beings who oversee us. But there is another possibility, more hopeful. Perhaps the experiment is designed precisely to test ethics itself. If humanity is given freedom, power, and awareness, what will we choose? Will we act with compassion or with cruelty? Will we exploit or will we protect? In this view, the watchers may not impose ethics on us, but wait to see if we can discover it ourselves. Our moral struggles, our debates about justice, our efforts to reduce suffering, these may be the real data, the outcomes that matter most. This possibility reframes the question. The watchers may not be judged by ethics. We are. The experiment may not be about whether they are benevolent or cruel, but about whether we can become ethical beings despite the conditions set for us. If so, then every act of kindness, every attempt at justice, every effort to ease suffering becomes part of the experiment's core purpose. It also explains why intervention when it occurs is subtle. If the point is to see how we handle freedom, then overt guidance would ruin the test. Instead, we are given hints, visions, and challenges, but left to make the choices ourselves. The ethics of the experiment may not lie in preventing suffering, but in offering us the chance to respond to it with morality. This raises a final question. If humanity is an experiment, what happens when it ends? On Earth, experiments are concluded, results recorded, and subjects often released or disposed of. If the watchers are ethical, perhaps the end of the experiment means graduation, a release into a higher state of being. If they are indifferent, perhaps the end means extinction. Our data gathered and our story closed. The uncertainty is unsettling, but it also gives weight to our actions. Now, if ethics is the point, then what we do matters, even if we never know the outcome. And once we have wrestled with the ethics, another question arises. How exactly do the watchers shape us? If interventions and whispers exist, what tools do they use? Are the leaps in our evolution natural or engineered? Could the very mutations that define us be the fingerprints of hidden hands? And so, the story of the experiment turns from questions of ethics to the mechanisms themselves. The possibility that evolution has not been blind, but guided, altered by a hidden hand. When people think of evolution, they usually picture it as a slow natural process. Tiny changes in DNA accumulate over countless generations, and species adapt to their environments in a gradual march of survival. It is the framework Darwin outlined, refined by genetics and modern biology. But when we look closely at humanity's story, the neatness of gradualism begins to blur. There are leaps that seem too fast, changes that feel too sudden, and traits that stand out as oddly advanced compared to the rest of nature. These irregularities fuel the question: has our evolution truly been blind? Or has it been nudged, adjusted, even engineered? If humanity is an experiment, then evolution itself may bear the fingerprints of hidden hands. One of the most obvious anomalies lies in the rapid expansion of the human brain. For millions of years, hominin skulls grew only modestly with brains suited to survival in a harsh environment. Then, within a relatively short window, brain size and complexity surged, language, abstract thought, symbolic art, and culture emerged in a span that feels abrupt compared to evolutionary timelines. Why then? Why so suddenly? Mainstream science points to environmental pressures, diet, and social complexity as possible drivers. Yet, even with those explanations, the leap feels extraordinary, like a sudden acceleration rather than a steady climb. In the experiment framework, this is exactly what intervention would look like: a key adjustment, a hidden hand reshaping the trajectory of a species. There are also peculiarities in human genetics. For instance, humans have 46 chromosomes, while our closest relatives, chimpanzees and gorillas, have 48. Genetic studies show that 2 ancestral chromosomes fused to create human chromosome 2. This fusion is precise and unusual. Scientists explain it as a rare natural mutation that became fixed in the population. But skeptics ask, why would such a rare mutation become universal in humans? And why would it appear just as we were diverging sharply from other primates? If the Watchers were altering our biology, this kind of targeted change is exactly what we might expect. Language itself is another mystery. The ability to produce complex speech requires anatomical and neurological adaptations, a descended larynx, fine motor control, and specialized brain regions. These features seem to have appeared together, enabling the sudden flowering of symbolic culture. Other animals communicate, but nothing approaches the depth and flexibility of human language. Evolutionary theory suggests gradual development, but evidence points to a sudden threshold being crossed. Was this another tweak, an intentional upgrade inserted into our genome to accelerate the experiment? Consciousness, as already discussed, complicates the story further. If awareness is not easily explained by biology alone, then its emergence may have been engineered. The Watchers in this view might not only have adjusted our physical traits, but also fine-tuned our cognitive capacities, pushing us towards self-awareness. This would explain why humans seem uniquely burdened with existential questions, moral struggles, and creative imagination. It is as though a switch was flipped, a hidden hand guiding evolution toward reflection and meaning. Evidence of possible intervention also appears in myths. Many ancient cultures describe their ancestors as being shaped or taught by gods. The Sumerians spoke of the Anunnaki creating humans to serve them. The Bible describes Adam formed from clay, life breathed into him by God. In Mesoamerican stories, humanity is fashioned from maize dough or mud, reshaped until the creators are satisfied. These myths may be symbolic, but they carry a consistent theme. Humanity was not a random accident, but a deliberate creation adjusted until it was ready. Skeptics argue that myths are metaphor, not memory. But what if they are distorted recollections of actual interventions? If early humans encountered beings who altered their biology or bestowed knowledge, how else could they describe it except as gods shaping clay? In this interpretation, myths preserve fragments of the story, that our evolution was not entirely natural, but guided by hands we mistook for divine. Even archaeology hints at anomalies. The sudden appearance of agriculture around 10,000 years ago transformed human life. Before that, humans lived as hunter-gatherers for hundreds of thousands of years. Then, almost simultaneously across multiple regions, agriculture emerged. Wheat and barley in the Middle East, rice in Asia, maize in the Americas. Why then? And why in so many places at once? Some argue for climatic shifts, but others see it as suspiciously well-timed. If the Watchers wanted to accelerate civilization, introducing or inspiring agriculture would be the perfect adjustment. It provided surplus food, allowed population growth, and laid the foundation for cities, writing, and science. Another clue lies in our vulnerabilities. Humans are unusually fragile compared to other animals, We are born prematurely, requiring years of care. Our spines struggle under the strain of upright posture. Our jaws are poorly adapted for modern diets, leading to dental issues. If evolution were purely blind, why would these weaknesses persist? One possibility is that they are simply byproducts of rapid change, evidence of tinkering rather than smooth adaptation. Like software patched quickly, our bodies show signs of hasty adjustment. The role of disease also raises questions. Epidemic-shaped populations forcing genetic adaptations. Some suggest this is natural selection at work. But what if diseases themselves are part of the experiment? Tools to test resilience and adaptability. A sudden emergence of pandemics throughout history could be seen not only as natural, but as interventions, challenges inserted into the system to observe outcomes. Just as humans expose lab animals to stresses, the watchers may expose us to pathogens to measure response. Genetic studies also reveal puzzling junk DNA, vast stretches of our genome with no clear function. Some scientists believe these regions are leftovers of evolutionary history. Others suspect hidden functions, not yet understood. But to those who imagine intervention, junk DNA might be something else. Code written for purposes we cannot yet read, dormant instructions awaiting activation, or remnants of past modifications. If humanity is engineered, our genome may contain signatures of design hidden in plain sight. Even our cultural evolution suggests nudges. The bursts of innovations of stone tools, symbolic art, metallurgy, industrial revolutions seem to arrive in waves, often without clear precursors. Invention sometimes leaps forward as though knowledge was seeded rather than discovered. Skeptics attribute this to human ingenuity, but the timing often feels too precise. Why did multiple societies independently invent writing within a narrow window? Why did mathematics and astronomy bloom simultaneously across distant cultures? Intervention through ideas may be as real as intervention through biology. Of course, none of this is proof. None of this is. Evolutionary science provides strong explanations for many of these anomalies, even if questions remain. But the experiment framework invites us to consider another layer. What if the natural processes are real, but not the whole story? What if evolution is the canvas and hidden hands occasionally adjust the brush strokes? That would explain both the consistency of scientific theory and the anomalies that seem to defy it. The ethical questions we discussed earlier also apply here. If our evolution was guided, then the watchers have played a direct role in shaping who we are. Do we owe our existence to them? Or are we prisoners of their design, locked into paths we did not choose? The answer may depend on how much freedom remains. Even if evolution was nudged, we still make choices. Our culture, morality, and creativity may be our own. Even if our bodies were sculpted, thinking of evolution this way also reframes our understanding of ourselves. We often see ourselves as the pinnacle of a long blind process, the accidental result of chance and survival. But if there was intervention, then we are participants in a deliberate project. That realization changes identity. We are not just evolved animals. We are engineered beings shaped for purposes we may not yet know. This possibility also carries hope. If evolution was guided, then perhaps it is still ongoing. The watchers may not be finished. Future adjustments could be coming. Genetic changes, leaps in consciousness, sudden shifts in culture. What we are today may not be the final form of humanity, but a stage in a larger process. Just as we look back at Neanderthals' nostrilopathy scenes as earlier versions of ourselves, perhaps the watchers look at us as transitional, still being refined. It also raises the question of legacy. If we someday gain the power to guide evolution ourselves through genetic engineering or artificial intelligence, will we become the watchers for new beings? Will we continue the cycle shaping life as we were shaped? In that sense, the hidden hand of evolution may not be an alien intrusion, but a pattern. Each generation of intelligence guides the next. This line of thought brings us naturally to another dimension of the experiment, the inner world of dreams, myths, and messages. If evolution was guided through biology, it may also be guided through consciousness itself. The mind, after all, is not only a product of genes, but also of stories, symbols, and visions. Perhaps the Watchers have always influenced humanity, not only through the body, but through the imagination, planting ideas and dreams, and myths that shape us as surely as any mutation. If humanity is an experiment, then the Watchers may not limit themselves to shaping our bodies or guiding our history through visible events. They may also work in the realm of the mind, where thoughts, dreams, and myths take shape. After all, the human mind is both the instrument of survival and the canvas of imagination. It is where culture is born, where meaning is created, and where choices are decided. If an experiment is meant to test morality, creativity, or resilience, then influencing the mind directly would be one of the most efficient methods. And when we look closely, it seems that much of human history has been marked by mysterious messages, strange dreams, and enduring myths that point toward contact with something beyond ourselves. Dreams have always fascinated humanity. They are nightly journeys into strange worlds, sometimes chaotic, sometimes vivid, sometimes carrying meaning that feels too precise to dismiss. Ancient cultures often treated dreams as messages from the gods. The Greeks believed dreams were visits from divine figures or spirits. Egyptians recorded dreams in manuals, interpreting them as omens. In the Bible, Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dream about 7 fat cows and 7 lean cows as a prophecy of famine. Across civilizations, dreams were rarely dismissed as random. They were seen as communications, guidance, or warnings. If the Watchers wanted to influence humanity without revealing themselves, dreams would be the perfect channel. They bypass rational defenses, reach the subconscious directly, and leave behind impressions that shape behavior. Even in modern times, dreams retain their power. People report life-changing insights arriving through dreams. Artists and scientists alike have drawn from them. Paul McCartney dreamed the melody of yesterday. Dmitri Mendeleev dreamed of the periodic table structure, and Kuhl dreamed the shape of the benzene molecule as a snake biting its tail. These are not trivial insights. They are breakthroughs that change culture and science. Were these simply products of the unconscious mind, or were they whispers planted by unseen hands? In the experiment framework, dreams may be one of the most active channels of intervention, offering ideas and inspiration at just the right moment. Myths, too, carry the weight of messages. Every culture has origin stories, tales of gods, heroes, and cosmic battles. While the details differ, certain themes appear again and again. Humans shaped or guided by beings from the sky, floods that reset civilization, teachers who bring fire, knowledge, or law. These stories are often dismissed as pre-scientific attempts to explain the world, but their consistency is striking. Why do cultures separated by oceans tell such similar tales? Why do they all point upward to the heavens as the source of guidance? If myths are echoes of contact, then they may be deliberate messages coded in story form to survive across generations. Consider the flood myths. The story of a great deluge that wipes out humanity appears in Mesopotamian texts like the Epic of Gilgamesh, in the Bible story of Noah, in Hindu texts of Manu, and in countless indigenous traditions worldwide. Did every culture independently invent the same tale? Or are they all remembering a shared event? If it was a real flood, perhaps the story is history. But if it was more than that, perhaps it is symbolic. A message about cycles of destruction and renewal planted in myth as a warning. In an experiment, messages may not always be literal. They may be symbols designed to provoke reflection more than record fact. Other myths describe beings who bring gifts. Prometheus steals fire from the gods and gives it to humans. Quetzalcoatl brings maize and civilization to the Mesoamericans. He gives writing to Egypt. These stories frame human progress, not as invention, but as reception. Knowledge is not discovered, but bestowed. In the experiment view, these myths are not exaggerations, but metaphors for real interventions. Messages carried in the form of stories that encode the idea that we have been guided not alone. Even fairy tales and folklore can be seen this way. They often carry moral lessons, warnings, or coded instructions. Don't go into the woods alone. Beware the trickster. Respect the stranger. These may seem like simple cultural rules, but what if they are echoes of deeper messages filtered through imagination? Folklore might be the subconscious archive of the experiment, filled with fragments of communication that outlast memory. Mystical experiences also blur into this domain. Across time, individuals have reported visions that feel like messages. Joan of Arc claims to hear voices of saints guiding her actions. Shamans describe journeys into other realms where spirits provide wisdom. Mystics in all traditions report hearing words of comfort, guidance, or revelation in altered states of consciousness. Whether through fasting, prayer, meditation, or substances, these experiences often produce messages that reshape lives. From the experiment perspective, these could be channels of intervention, deliberate openings, through which watchers deliver insights without ever appearing directly. Skeptics, of course, argue that dreams and myths are products of the brain. Random firings of neurons, stories created to explain the unknown cultural patterns arising from shared human psychology. And there is truth to that. The brain does generate dreams, and cultures do share archetypes. But the experiment idea doesn't deny that. It suggests that the watchers may work through these very mechanisms using natural processes as channels. Just as humans communicate through language and symbols, perhaps the watchers communicate through dreams and myths, embedding messages in the forms we already use. One striking aspect of myths and dreams is their tendency to repeat archetypes. Jung called these archetypes part of the collective unconscious universal symbols shared by all humans. The wise old man, the hero's journey, the shadow, the flood, the rebirth. These appear everywhere. Jung saw them as structures of the mind itself. But what if they are also signals? If the watchers wanted to deliver messages that would endure across time and culture, embedding them in archetypes would be the perfect method. The symbols would resonate across generations, surviving translation and distortion. Even modern popular culture might carry such messages. Science fiction often anticipates real technological advances. Submarines, rockets, artificial intelligence. Writers describe aliens, simulations, and future humans long before science catches up. Are these coincidences or whispers filtered through imagination? If the experiment includes guidance, then perhaps even our stories of the future are seeded, preparing us for what lies ahead. Another curious phenomenon is the way certain messages arrive collectively. Entire cultures sometimes shift toward new myths, new dreams, or new visions. At the same time, the rise of monotheism in different regions, the spread of Enlightenment ideals, the global fascination with extraterrestrials in the 20th century. These seem like coordinated shifts in imagination. Perhaps they are cultural dreams nudged by the watchers to push humanity into new stages of growth. Messages may not always be clear, but perhaps clarity is not the point. If the goal is growth, then ambiguity forces interpretation. A dream that is too obvious teaches nothing. A myth that explains everything leaves no room for thought. By delivering messages in symbolic form, the watchers ensure that humans wrestle with meaning, debate, and create. The process of interpretation becomes part of the experiment. This ambiguity also allows freedom. A dream can be dismissed as nonsense or embraced as guidance. A myth can be taken literally, symbolically, or ignored. The choice remains with us. If the watchers forced belief, free will would collapse. By keeping messages veiled, they leave the decision to listen or not in our hands. The whispers of intervention, the dreams and myths, all serve the same function. To test not only our intelligence, but our wisdom, our willingness to seek meaning even when it is hidden. The persistence of dreams, myths, and messages also shows how deeply humanity craves connection. We want to believe that the universe speaks to us, that our lives are not random, that guidance exists. Even skeptics often live as though meaning is real, creating their own myths through science, politics, or personal philosophy. This craving itself might be part of the experiment. Do we invent meaning when it is not given, or do we recognize meaning when it is hidden? Either way, the process reveals something fundamental about us. And once we see dreams and myths as channels of intervention, the next question arises naturally. Where does the line between science and speculation fall? How do we distinguish genuine messages from imagination, real interventions from coincidence? At times, science seems to brush against these questions, uncovering phenomena that feel like hints, but stopping short of interpreting them. Perhaps that is intentional. Perhaps the experiment includes not only myths and dreams, but science itself, pushing us to test the boundary between what we know and what we suspect. Science and speculation have always lived side by side, though many like to pretend otherwise. Science is built on data, measurement, and repeatable results, while speculation belongs to the realm of imagination, intuition, and possibility. But when you trace the history of discovery, you quickly see that speculation has always been the spark. Someone dreams, wonders, or imagines something that seems impossible, and science eventually tests it. Sometimes it fails, sometimes it succeeds, and sometimes the line between speculation and knowledge becomes so blurred that you cannot tell where one ends and the other begins. If humanity is part of an experiment, this relationship itself may be one of the conditions designed into it. We're constantly pushed to test the edges of what we know, to let speculation fuel science, and to let science turn speculation into knowledge. Consider the history of flight. For centuries, humans looked at birds and dreamed of soaring through the air. Myths told of Icarus, of flying chariots, of gods who crossed the skies with ease. These were speculative stories, imagination reaching beyond the possible. Then came tinkerers who built wings of wood and cloth, testing those dreams. Most failed, but eventually with the Wright brothers, the speculation became science. The same pattern repeats with countless other technologies. Submarines were imagined in stories before they were engineered. Rockets dreamed long before they launched. Artificial intelligence described in novels before becoming code. Imagination pushes outward. Science follows behind, and the boundaries of the experiment shift with each success. This pattern suggests something important. If the experimenters exist, perhaps they designed us to live at the border between science and speculation. Too much certainty, and we would stagnate. Too much fantasy, and we would collapse into confusion by keeping us in the tension between the two. The experiment ensures constant progress. We are always reaching, always questioning, never fully content with what we know. That restless drive has taken us from caves to cities, from stone tools to satellites. One of the clearest examples of science brushing against speculation is the search for extraterrestrial life. For centuries, people speculated about beings on other planets, gods in the sky, or visitors from beyond. Today, astrobiologists use telescopes to search for exoplanets, analyzing atmospheres for traces of water or oxygen. Radio astronomers scan the cosmos for signals. Space probes carry instruments to Mars and icy moons, testing for signs of microbes. What was once myth has become science, and yet, even with data, the line remains blurred. The possibility of life elsewhere is still speculation because proof remains elusive. But the pursuit itself shows how science and speculation feed one another, each keeping the experiment moving forward. Another example is the study of consciousness. For thousands of years, philosophers speculated about the nature of the mind. Is it material or immaterial? Does it arise from the brain or exist beyond it? Today, neuroscientists map brain activity, probing the mechanisms of thought. They can see patterns of neurons firing, but the mystery of subjective experience remains unsolved. What it feels like to be alive, to dream, to suffer or love. This stubbornly resists reduction. Science can measure the electrical activity of a brain in love, but not the feeling itself. Speculation continues, filling the gap. Are we more than our biology? Is consciousness fundamental, woven into the universe itself? The experiment framework suggests that this gap may be intentional. A built-in ambiguity that forces us to straddle science and speculation without collapsing fully into either. Quantum physics adds another layer. In the early 20th century, scientists discovered that particles behave in ways that defy intuition. They exist in multiple states at once, collapse when observed, and interact across distances instantly. The mathematics works, but the interpretation borders on the mystical. Some scientists speculated that consciousness plays a role in shaping reality. Others suggested parallel universes, hidden dimensions, or simulation-like frameworks. These ideas sound like speculation, but they arise directly from equations. The boundary dissolves. The universe itself seems designed to keep us guessing, to push us toward speculation, even at the highest levels of science. Genetics provides similar puzzles. The discovery of DNA revealed the code of life, a molecule capable of storing instructions with astonishing efficiency. But questions remain. How did such complexity emerge? Is it purely the result of chance, or is there a design hidden within? Some researchers speculate about panspermia, the idea that life was seeded on Earth from elsewhere. Others suggest deeper patterns in the genetic code, perhaps even messages embedded within. Science investigates these possibilities, but the very fact that speculation persists shows how open-ended the experiment is. We're allowed to ask, to test, but not to reach certainty. Even cosmology, the study of the universe itself, brushes against speculation. The Big Bang Theory describes the beginning of space and time, but what came before remains unknown. Dark matter and dark energy make up most of the universe, yet we cannot see or measure them directly. Multiverse theories propose countless universes beyond ours, each with different laws of physics. These ideas are speculative, but they arise from serious scientific reasoning. Again, the line blurs. The Watchers, if they exist, may have built the universe itself to force this blur, ensuring that humans never stop asking questions. This tension plays out not only in science, but in culture. Stories of aliens, simulations, or advanced intelligences thrive because they live at the edge of possibility. Science doesn't disprove them, but it doesn't prove them either. The result is a fertile space where imagination runs wild, inspiring exploration. If we are an experiment, then this space of uncertainty is part of the design. Certainty ends inquiry. Uncertainty sustains it. Another interesting aspect is how speculation often anticipates science. Writers imagine technologies centuries before they are built. Philosophers propose ideas that later become experiments. This predictive quality suggests that imagination itself may be a tool of the experiment. It allows humanity to prepare for discoveries before they arrive, to dream the future into being. Speculation becomes not a distraction, but a roadmap. Perhaps the Watchers nudge these dreams, planting seeds of speculation that science eventually validates. Skeptics argue that speculation can also mislead, filling minds with fantasies that waste time and resources. Alchemy, astrology, and countless pseudosciences illustrate how speculation can drift away from reality. But even these failures serve a role. Alchemy, though flawed, paved the way for chemistry. Astrology, though inaccurate, inspired careful observation of the skies that led to astronomy. Failed speculations are still experiments, teaching us what doesn't work and pushing us closer to what does in the larger framework. Speculation may never be wasted because it always feeds the cycle of curiosity. The ethics of this interplay are also worth considering. If the Watchers guide us through whispers, perhaps they also guide us through speculation. They plant ideas not as facts, but as possibilities, waiting to see how we respond? Do we pursue them, test them, and grow? Or do we become lost in fantasy, abandoning reality altogether? The experiment may not be about the content of our ideas, but about our discipline in testing them, our ability to balance imagination with evidence. The way speculation interacts with crises also reveals its role. When humanity faces challenges, speculation often points the way forward. Nuclear power could destroy us, but speculation about clean energy drives innovation. Climate change threatens the planet, but speculation about sustainable futures inspires new technologies and movements. Pandemics bring fear, but speculation about vaccines and cures accelerates solutions. Science provides tools, but speculation provides direction. Without imagination, solutions would not exist. Perhaps the watchers test us not by giving answers, but by letting us dream of them. There is also the personal dimension. Individuals live daily at the border of science and speculation. We rely on evidence for practical life, the medicine we take, the technologies we use. But we also speculate constantly about relationships, about futures, about meaning. We ask questions science cannot answer. What is my purpose? What happens after death? Why do I suffer? These speculations shape our choices as much as any evidence does. If the experiment is designed to test humanity as a whole, then speculation at the personal level may be just as important as speculation at the cosmic level. Another intriguing angle is how speculation often leads to belief systems. Religions, philosophies, and ideologies grow out of speculations about the unseen. Some endure for millennia, shaping entire civilizations. Whether true or not, they drive behavior, culture, and morality. The experiment framework suggests that the watchers may care less about whether these beliefs are factually correct and more about how they shape us. Do they inspire compassion or cruelty? Do they promote growth or stagnation? The act of believing born from speculation may be the real variable under observation. The relationship between science and speculation also mirrors the structure of the universe itself. We see just enough to make theories, but never enough to be certain. Stars and galaxies reveal themselves, but most of the cosmos is hidden. The brain produces thoughts, but consciousness remains a mystery. Evolution explains much, but not everything. Each field of knowledge contains gaps, and those gaps are filled with speculation. This structure may not be accidental. It may be the architecture of the experiment itself, a balance between clarity and mystery, forcing humanity to stretch between what is known and what is imagined. And when we recognize this structure, the next question naturally emerges. If speculation fuels science, and both are shaped by uncertainty, what does that mean for our identity? How would it change us if we discovered that we were not an accident of evolution, but a designed experiment? The boundary between science and speculation would blur even more as the most fundamental question of all, what it means to be human, would shift. And so, from the interplay of science and speculation, the story moved forward to the implications of design. If we are an experiment, what does that say about us? How does it change the way we see ourselves, our purpose, and our place in the universe? If humanity is an experiment, then perhaps the most important question is not whether the watchers exist or how they might intervene, but what that realization would mean for us. How would our understanding of ourselves change if we discovered that we are not the product of blind evolution, not a random accident in an indifferent cosmos, but a species designed, guided, and observed? What would it do to our sense of purpose, to our ethics, to our future? Even without proof, the speculation itself has weight, because entertaining the idea reshapes how we think about who we are. The first shift would be in identity. For centuries, humans have debated whether life is meaningless or meaningful, whether we are dust animated by chance or souls created with intention. If we discovered that we were an experiment, the debate would take on a new form. Meaning would not be random, but neither would it necessarily be comforting. To know we were designed would be to know that someone somewhere wanted us to exist. But the purpose of that existence might not match our hopes. Were we created to grow, to learn, to love? Or were we created as specimens, as data points in a larger study? The fact of design does not guarantee benevolence. It guarantees only intention, and that alone would change how we see ourselves. Another consequence would be in morality. If we are observed, if our actions are data in an experiment, then every choice carries more weight. It is not only our own survival at stake, but the story we tell to the watchers about who we are. Acts of kindness, cruelty, creativity, or destruction become signals shaping the results of the experiment. This could inspire people to live with greater responsibility, as though being watched by future generations or higher beings. Or it could create despair, a sense of being trapped in a cage, unable to act freely. The effect would depend on how we interpret the experiment as an opportunity or as a prison. Society itself would be transformed. Religion, politics, and science are all built on assumptions about humanity's place in the cosmos. To learn that we are an experiment would shake those foundations. Religions that teach divine creation would see their narratives reframed. Perhaps the gods were the watchers, and creation was not timeless, but intentional manipulation. Science would face the unsettling realization that natural laws may be layered with hidden design. Politics would be forced to consider what it means to govern a species whose destiny might be shaped from beyond. Some would embrace the discovery as a unifying truth. Others would resist, fearing the loss of old frameworks. There would also be a change in how we view suffering. If life is designed, then pain cannot be dismissed as meaningless. It would have to be part of the design, part of the test. Some would find comfort in that. The idea that suffering is not random, that it serves a purpose beyond our comprehension. Others would rage against it, seeing it as proof of cruelty. Either way, the knowledge would strip suffering of its ambiguity. We could no longer call it chance. We would have to face it as part of the structure of our existence. Hope would shift as well. If we are an experiment, then perhaps there is a goal, a graduation, a stage beyond this one. Many religions already teach this. Heaven, Nana, Moxia, enlightenment. The experiment framework could provide a secular version. Maybe the watchers wait for us to reach a threshold, at which point we join them or move to a new stage of existence. This would give humanity a collective purpose, a reason to strive not only for survival, but for growth. It would make our struggles feel like steps in a process, not accidents of fate. On the other hand, the discovery could lead to despair. If we are only an experiment, perhaps we are disposable. Perhaps we are not meant to last, only to provide data. That thought could unravel meaning for some, reducing life to a temporary project with no future. Others might rebel, rejecting the role of subject and striving to break free of the experiment, even if that means destroying it. The psychological impact would be unpredictable, varying from inspiration to nihilism. Another layer of meaning would emerge in creativity. If we are watched, then art, music, literature, and science are not only human expressions, but messages to the watchers. Every painting, every song, every discovery becomes part of our identity, the record we send to whoever is observing. This could deepen the sense of importance in human culture, turning every act of creation into a declaration of who we are. It might also explain why humans are so relentlessly creative, pouring meaning into symbols and stories. Perhaps creativity itself is the experiment, the variable being measured most closely. The sense of connection would change too. If we are designed, then we are not alone. Even if the watchers remain hidden, the knowledge of their existence would reshape the loneliness of the cosmos. We would know that we are part of a larger story, participants in something vast. This might ease the existential fear of isolation, replacing it with awe. But it might also deepen the sense of control, as though our every move is monitored. Whether this is comforting or terrifying would depend on perspective. Ethics between humans might also shift. If we are all subjects in the same experiment, then divisions of race, nation, or religion could seem trivial. We are united not only by biology, but by circumstance. We share the same enclosure, the same test. Recognizing this could encourage solidarity, a sense of shared purpose, or it could intensify conflict as groups compete to interpret the experiment differently, each claiming to know the true meaning. Once again, the outcome would depend on how the knowledge was framed. There is also the question of responsibility to the watchers. If they designed us, do we owe them loyalty, gratitude, resistance? If they intervene occasionally, do we treat them as gods, as scientists, as future versions of ourselves? The relationship would be complex, filled with tension. Some might worship the watchers, others might resist them. Still others might seek to join them, to become watchers themselves. The experiment would not only test us, but transform us into participants in its own continuation. Even time itself would feel different. If we are an experiment, and our timeline is not random, it has a beginning, perhaps an end, perhaps milestones along the way. We would no longer see history as aimless, but as structured even if we do not know the structure. Every collapse, every renaissance, every leap of knowledge could be seen as part of the curriculum. This might inspire patience, the sense that we are moving towards something, or it might fuel urgency, the drive to accelerate and reach the end. The discovery would also raise new scientific questions. Could we detect the design in our DNA, in the laws of physics, in the patterns of history? Could we prove the experiment through evidence? Or would it always remain just out of reach? If the watchers are advanced enough, their design may be indistinguishable from nature. Science would be forced to expand its methods, to search for signatures, not only in matter, but in meaning. The pursuit of proof would become one of the great projects of humanity. And then there is the question of freedom. If we are designed, are we free? Or are our choices scripted by the conditions of the experiment? This is one of the oldest debates in philosophy, reframed on a cosmic scale. If the watchers set the parameters, but allow free will within them, then our choices are real. But if the parameters are too strong, if every path is predetermined, then freedom is an illusion. The experiment framework forces us to confront this question directly. Are we actors or are we puppets? The answer may never be clear, but the struggle to answer it defines much of human culture. For many, the most important meaning would be survival. If we are an experiment, then perhaps we are being tested on whether we can endure. The watchers may be waiting to see if we destroy ourselves, or if we learn to cooperate. In that case, every crisis we face, climate change, war, inequality, becomes not just a challenge but an exam. Passing means continuing. Failing means extinction. This gives urgency to human action, turning survival into not just biology, but evaluation. The possibility that we are an experiment also changes how we view death. If life is designed, then death may not be an end, but a transition. Perhaps individuals graduate when they die, moving to another stage. Or perhaps death is simply the reset of the experiment, data collected, the process continuing. This uncertainty could bring comfort to some, fear to others, but it would remove the idea that death is meaningless. It would be part of the structure, intentional rather than random. In the end, what it would mean for us comes down to interpretation. The experiment idea can inspire awe, despair, hope, fear, unity, or division. It can make life feel precious because every act matters. Or it can make life feel cheap because we are just specimens. It can inspire us to strive for growth or to rebel against control. The meaning is not fixed. It is ours to decide. And perhaps that is the final twist of the experiment itself. The watchers set the stage, but the story is written by us. The meaning of being an experiment is not given. It is chosen. And once we face this choice, the story moves naturally to its close. After all the speculation, the myths, the whispers, and the questions, we return to the present moment. Whether we are designed or accidental, watched or alone, the fact remains. We are here alive, listening, wondering. And perhaps that is the real heart of the experiment. Not the watchers, not the design, but the way we live with the question itself. And so, dear listener, we find ourselves back where we began, staring at a question that is as old as our first stories and as persistent as the stars we look up to at night. What if humanity is an experiment? What if everything we have endured, everything we have created, and everything we have dreamed has unfolded not in isolation, but under the gaze of others? Whether they are gods, extraterrestrials, future versions of ourselves, or something so far beyond us that we cannot give it a name. This thought can be overwhelming, even unsettling. To wonder if every joy and sorrow is part of a design can make life feel heavy with meaning or hollow with suspicion. But as we've wandered through myths and science, through history and imagination, one thing becomes clear. The idea itself changes us regardless of whether it is true. To sit with it, to hold it in our minds for even a moment, is to step outside the ordinary and see our lives from another angle. Imagine for a moment that the experiment is real. Imagine that there are watchers who have been following humanity since its first sparks of fire, who observed when we painted caves with symbols, when we raised pyramids toward the heavens, when we split atoms, when we sent voices into the cosmos on golden records. Imagine that our wars and our peace treaties, our music and our silence, our despair and our resilience are all part of what they are learning from us. In that frame, even the most ordinary moment becomes extraordinary. The laugh of a child, the kindness of a stranger, the quiet decision to keep going on a hard day, all of it becomes data, but also testimony. Testimony to what it means to be human. But what if the experiment is not about them at all? What if it is about us? What if the point is not whether we are watched, but whether we learn to watch ourselves, to see our own patterns, to reflect on our own choices? In that sense, the experiment could be a mirror, not a cage. The watchers might not be keeping us trapped, but simply providing the conditions for us to discover who we are. And maybe, just maybe, the true purpose of the experiment is for us to grow into beings who can run it ourselves, who can one day guide and nurture other lives, just as we may have been guided. There is something strangely comforting about this possibility. If the experiment is real, then we are not alone. Someone somewhere cares enough to watch, to study, to nudge. They may not always intervene. They may not prevent our pain, but they are present. And if the experiment is not real, if humanity is simply the product of chance and time, then the result is the same. Our actions still matter, because we are the ones giving them meaning. Either way, we are not meaningless. Either way, our choices shape the story. It's also worth remembering that every civilization has carried its own version of this question. The ancient Mesopotamians told of gods who made humans to serve them. The Greeks spoke of mortals tested by Olympians. Indigenous peoples told stories of sky beings who visited and taught. Modern scientists build models of simulations. Physicists speculate about multiverses. Futurists wonder about time loops. The language changes. The imagery shifts. But the core question remains. Are we alone in this? Or is someone watching? That continuity itself is a clue. Perhaps the persistence of the question is part of the experiment. Perhaps wondering is the point. And then there's you sitting here, now listening to these words, letting them move through your mind. Maybe you're lying in bed, drifting towards sleep. Maybe you're on a bus, watching the city pass outside your window. Maybe you're in a quiet room, earbuds in, the world hushed for a while. Wherever you are, you're part of this reflection. You're carrying the question for yourself, not as an abstract idea, but as something personal. Because in the end, whether humanity is an experiment on a cosmic scale, The truth of it always comes down to individuals, to you, to me, to all of us, choosing how to live within the uncertainty. And what do we do with that uncertainty? Some find comfort in faith, trusting that the watchers, if they exist, are benevolent. Others take strength in skepticism, deciding that whether or not we are observed, meaning must be built by our own hands. Many live in between, open to mystery, unwilling to dismiss possibility, content to dwell in questions without rushing to answers. Wherever you fall, the experiment, if it exists, accommodates all of it. Curiosity itself may be the variable. Even now, as we speak of this, the stars continue their quiet shine. Civilizations rise and fall, but the sky remains. The same constellations that guided sailors, inspired poets, and frightened prophets still hang above us. Maybe they are nothing more than burning gas. Maybe they are signals, messages, reminders. Whatever they are part of our story. And we keep looking up as though drawn by instinct to seek something beyond. That instinct is uncheckable. And it is one of the clearest signs that if we are in an experiment, it is an experiment designed to keep us reaching. So what would you do differently knowing you might be observed? Would you treat others with more kindness, aware that every act might be part of the record? Would you create more knowing that your music, your art, your words could outlast you as signals of who we were? Would you resist despair? Not because suffering isn't real, but because resilience might be the very thing the experiment is testing. These are not questions anyone else can answer for you. They belong to you alone in the privacy of your own thoughts. And perhaps that's the truest way to close this journey. Not with certainty, not with conclusions, but with an invitation. An invitation to carry the question with you, to let it color the way you see the world, not as proof, but as perspective. Because whether or not the watches exist, whether or not we are truly part of an experiment, the effect of believing we might be is real. It sharpens awareness, deepens meaning, and expands possibility. So tonight or tomorrow, or whenever you next look at the stars, you might remember this conversation. You might wonder if someone is looking back. You might smile at the thought, or feel a chill, or simply shake your head and return to the ordinary. All of those responses are human, and all of them are valid. The experiment, if it exists, records them all. And here we are at the edge of the question once again. The watchers may be real, or they may not. The experiment may be cosmic, or it may simply be the story we tell ourselves to make sense of existence. Either way, the fact that you are here listening, breathing, wondering is enough. Whether by design or by chance, this moment is yours. And perhaps that is all the meaning we need.